I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Peter Rogers to the show, long-awaited Durian Rider, who we just watched a video of. Allie and I have been on his protocols, or his protocols, for quite a while, and we actually found Peter Rogers through Durian Rider. Allie started showing me his videos, and I was like, man, this guy's really funny. I mean this in the least gay way possible, but I could listen to you talk all day. We're into the same stuff. So yeah, so I'm stoked you're here.
I got something interesting, I think, to say.
Shoot.
That relates to what Durian was just saying. So what Durian said is, when your cortisol is high, you're stressed out. He says you crave sweets, and they're beneficial to sugar because it lowers your cortisol. And it makes sense, because when you're stressed out, typically it came from evolutionary time of physical danger. And the purpose of cortisol was to raise your blood sugar. So if you eat sugar, you raise your blood sugar by what you're eating, and you don't need the cortisol, so your endogenous cortisol can be decreased. So it just makes sense. And I think that's good news. That's interesting. Another thing a little bit interesting was there was a book that came out not that long ago about research on monosodium glutamate. And monosodium glutamate caused increased cortisol. And I thought that was funny, because you then have a mechanism for a vicious cycle. And I think a lot of people are making themselves quite sick with the processed food, because they put lots of monosodium glutamate in their MSG and lots of MFG, manufactured free glutamate. And the glutamate's an excitatory neurotransmitter, like a mild brain excitotoxin, a mild stimulant. And simultaneously, it's increasing cortisol. And what does cortisol do in the brain? Cortisol increases glutamate transmission across the neurons, the excitatory neurotransmitter. So you're starting to ramp up a vicious cycle of excessive overstimulation of the brain cells. So you see what I'm saying? You're sort of like, sugar can do something beneficial, as Durian Rider said, but the processed foods mess you up and can kick you into a higher cortisol vicious cycle. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
People around us have this idea that it's harmful to convert to veganism, especially if you do it in a short amount of time. When I say short, I mean a few years. What do you think about that idea? Like, is it inherently harmful to overnight go vegan?
You're going to get a little bit of a gut ache, because basically your bacteria in your gut have been adjusted to one type of diet.
Yeah.
When you start eating a lot more fiber, you basically favor the plant related bacteria. So you're going to have a gut ache for, over the course of a week or two. Some people are sensitive to gluten. Sometimes they're sensitive to other things. So they might have some discomfort, but, I'm not aware of people having that much trouble. But, there's going to be some individual variability. Most of the plant foods are much better tolerated than a lot of the animal foods, And I'm not a big fan of soy. Some people can be gluten sensitive. Some people react kind of sensitive to the beans. But, usually I think it's a question of you experiment for a week or two and figure out what you like, what can satisfy your hunger. And then you just keep on moving in that direction. And eventually, I believe it's nice to be 100% vegan, because that way your gut's exposed to pretty much the same thing every day or something similar. And so it doesn't go back and forth, the bacteria. Because otherwise if people go back and forth from meat and processed food to plant foods, then the gut flora are constantly fighting it out for territory. And that's going to give you, cramps and bloating and flatulence and all that.
So that's almost like ovo pescatarian, the middle ground kind of is almost like not a good, because it's almost like in the middle. That's really weird.
Yeah, I kind of think that's what's happened is the conventional medicine knows that it has to, throw a little bit of a olive branch or something to the public. So it says, oh, we now recommend the Mediterranean diet. But the Mediterranean doesn't exclude almost anything except, heavily processed food is about it. So it's really not that healthy. So it's a way to keep everybody sick, but pretending you're trying to help them.
Right. So I heard you say in a video, it was pretty interesting. You said fat deficient diets don't exist, because we're dealing with so many people that are just like fat all the time. And the whole, it's healthy fats versus plant seed oils and like all this stuff. And we're low fat to no fat, really. We don't use any oil when we eat. We've been doing the Kempner / Durian Rider. I grew up, my mom raised me McDougall since I was born in 1978, which was pretty much when he started. And then in my late 20s and early 30s, I went full on carnivore, straight up keto for a while, and then went back to veganism. And so it was a crazy journey. Alicia down here, she's a new vegan as of this month. What do you we have a lot of our friends. She's coming off of a fast.
Christmas is 60 days.
Yeah.
So the first was the water fast for 2 weeks, and then I went into organic juice, predominantly fruit. And I'm down 31 odd pounds, and I'm trying to clean out. That's what I'm experiencing. It's the detoxification from what I was putting in my body. But I feel great, like, other than not feeling great.
Yeah, I would maybe say something right here at this point is when you have an acute stress response, running from a tiger, being chased by a tiger in the dark is usually the way I remember it, is what does the cortisol and the catecholamines do? The epinephrine, norepinephrine. They raise your blood sugar. They raise your blood glucose. So what I'm trying to say is what Dorian's saying is makes sense. He says you eat sugar and you get, the sucrose is the fructose and the glucose. You raise your blood glucose. You don't raise your blood ketones. When you eat a fruit, you don't raise your ketones. You raise your blood sugar. And so what I'm saying, that's the natural thing to do. And what is a starch? Like the rice you mentioned, it's a polymer of glucose. It's not a polymer of ketones. So the default fuel is glucose. It's not ketones. Ketones is starvation response. It's not first choice of the body.
What do you think about fasting in general?
Well, I think fasting, kind of like getting to the pleasure trap of Doug Lyle, it can be a way to reset your taste buds. Like if you're in the habit of eating all this processed junk food with all the flavorants in there, the MSG, the salt, and everything else they add, it's very difficult to all of a sudden go to the relatively bland, simple plant foods. So fasting for a little while can kind of, once you're real hungry, you'll be willing to go more readily to the plant food and it'll taste better. It won't be so blah. So I think it can be beneficial in that sense. And I've heard a lot of other good things about it, mitophagy and all that. But it's also the case that sooner or later you got to eat. So you can only fast for a little while.
What do you think about caffeine?
Well, my attitude about caffeine is, it's a brain stimulant. It basically mimics the same process as acute stress. It raises cortisol and the catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine. And so it can cause insomnia, half-life 6 to 8 hours. So even if you drink it in the morning, there's still some on board at night and you don't sleep as deeply. So I don't like that. Also, I think that, my theory about neurodegeneration, I think it's the best one in the world. There's a couple different theories of neurodegeneration, is that basically I call it the supply and demand theory. You got a baseline metabolic rate in the neuron. And when you have caffeine, it increases the metabolic rate of the neuron. Okay, but it's also a vasoconstrictor. It's about 15 to 20% drops blood flow to the frontal lobes of the brain. So I don't like that combination. You're ramping up metabolic rate in your neurons while simultaneously dropping blood flow to them. By itself, it's not that big of a deal, but you start superimposing all that other stuff on. Okay, let's say you just have, Coca-Cola, caffeine with a big pizza. All that fat of the pizza is going to stick the red blood cells together. Basically, it raises LDL cholesterol and triglycerides. Those have a positive charge on them, which sticks to the red blood cells, which have a negative charge on them, called the zeta potential, and it makes them all stick together. It's called rouleau formation, like a stack of coins in French. And the point of it is that you make your blood thick. So now you're pumping thick blood that drops oxygen delivery to the tissues another 15%. So you're starting to screw over your neuron. You're raising its metabolic rate while simultaneously dropping its oxygen delivery. So if that gap gets too far, you can start having neurons go into programmed self-death, going into apoptosis. And there tends to be multiple other things. You eat a pizza, all the fat of the pizza, as well as the sodium, is a vasoconstrictor, inhibits endothelial nitric oxide. So you're further dropping the oxygen and glucose delivery to the neuron. Plus, in any processed food, they tend to put lots of mold inhibitors, mitochondrial inhibitors. And the mitochondrial inhibitors drop the ATP energy production of the cell. Well, now you're double screwed because you've ramped up the metabolic rate. So you got to pump the calcium out of the cell cytoplasm to turn down the metabolic rate, but you can't make enough ATP because your mitochondria are inhibited. You're screwing that neuron. You're cranking its metabolic rate, you're preventing its ability to defend itself, and you're not giving it its oxygen and glucose. So the older you get and the more compromised you are, the more likely you're just going to keep losing neurons due to what I call supply and demand. That's the Pete Rogers supply and demand theory of neurodegeneration. And multiple things get superimposed on. You got a cell phone that opens up voltage-gated calcium channels, so more calcium is going up in the cell cytoplasm. So you got all these factors, nickel and diming and working your brain cells towards programmed cell death, apoptosis.
Yikes. So that's like, that makes me think of that whole bulletproof coffee trend where people are putting MCT oil and ghee in their coffee in the morning.
Stupid.
That's like extra bad.
Yeah, why would you're ramping up your caffeine, so you're going to increase glutamate transmission at your synapses with cortisol and catecholamines, and on top of it, you're throwing a bunch of fat in there to decrease oxygen and glucose delivery. Brilliant.
Yeah, extra stress on the body.
Yeah, stupid.
Wild.
And they were paying like $30 for a cup of that stuff.
Yeah, big buck.
That's wild. So tell me about omega-3s.
Well, see, any billion-dollar food, the companies are so rich, they buy the journals, then they buy the scientists, and then they start producing all these bogus studies to claim their product is good. And then what they end up doing is, here's the typical argument they'll say. They'll say, well, the preponderance of evidence shows that it's beneficial. And they just do that because if there's 5 studies that were real showing their product's bad, they just publish 10 studies that are all bogus showing the product's good. Then they say, the weight of the evidence, the majority of the evidence suggests that our product is good, but it's bogus industry-funded research. And there's reasons why I think omega-3 supplements are a bad idea. The first one is they suppress the immune system. Well, the immune system is what protects you from cancer. And they've been shown in multiple studies to increase the risk of prostate cancer. So I don't want to increase the risk of that. I don't want my immune system suppressed. So who needs it? Plus, a lot of times they go right to DHA, which is the long-chain omega-3 fatty acid. And that removes all your options. If you start with ALA, the 18 carbon, versus going all the way to DHA, you've got options to make it into other things. But when you give her the end-stage DHA, you're stuck with it. You're basically overdosing on DHA is what I'm saying. And it has multiple double bonds in it, making it much increased risk of lipid peroxidation. The more double bonds, the higher the risk of it going rancid, basically. That's why they put it in an opaque jar and say store it in the fridge. It's routine that it's rancid. There's several studies showing that it's routine to have it rancid by the time you eat it. And then you can get these toxic aldehydes from that. So that's bogus. It increases the risk of atrial fibrillation, okay? And it also increases the risk of obesity, of weight gain. It increases the LDL cholesterol, so it's an atherogenic risk in that sense. It causes insulin resistance, increasing your risk of diabetes. So that's why I think it's a crock of BS. How can you say this is going to make people healthy or something that increases the risk of being fat, diabetic, with atherosclerosis, and a suppressed immune system, with potential for rancidity and all that goes with that, potential for mercury if it's not adequately purified, which is difficult to do. So I think omega-3 supplementation is bogus.
Nice. Awesome. I know Patty probably has some questions or something. I know, or anyone else does. I have loads. I'll keep going.
Go for it. You know, with regard, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Pat, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to introduce you. Patty's a professor of health, I believe.
Anatomy and physiology. I teach at a college.
Cool.
And I've been loving your videos. Jeffrey got me introduced me to you, and I totally love how in depth, like you get into cellular respiration, and you're getting into the electron transport chain, tying it in with all of the different ways in which things like high fat or iron interrupt that passage of electrons. I mean, no other person on YouTube is explaining it with the amount of detail that you do. And so I just want to express my gratitude for that, because you watch these health videos and they're just so surface level. Like they make a claim, but they don't back it up. So anyway, I just wanted to thank you, because I've been finding your videos to be quite informative. But yeah, on the omega-3 thing, you know, I went to medical school a long time ago. And I did an internship with Joel Furman in 1998 at his water fasting clinic. And, you know, he's big now in the, you know, vegan movement, obviously. But he has stated that people need the omega-3s because there's, you know, impact on their mental, I guess, abilities. He's noticed people go into mental decline because of low omega-3s. Does he have any backup for that you've seen?
I don't want to get in an argument with him, but I think that if you look at it carefully, I don't think it's a good idea to be taking those omega-3s. I can also tell you there's a guy by the name of Jeff Nelson at VegSource, which has done multiple videos on that subject. And I agree with the research of VegSource. And I can also tell you, VegSource guy, Jeff Nelson, he was best friends with Dr. McDougall. So he studied everything with McDougall. And actually what I think was happening was McDougall didn't want to get into a head-on-head conflict argument with Furman and Greger and those guys. So what he would do is he would review stuff with Nelson. Nelson didn't care, and then Nelson would make videos about it. Like he made all those videos about nuts and stuff. They're very good.
Yeah. Nelson had a great video that he put out with your. Well, I guess you were on his channel recently, with your story of what happened when you were in med school and you were put on the psychotropic drugs for a short period of time.
My father was crazy. Yeah, I did the video. You see it?
It's amazing that the big pharma research can cause a father to do this to his own son, because he trusted the research. And, when you're in the system long enough, I think it really does mold your mind into what you believe to be true. And I think there's been a spell cast upon almost every physician in the world, in the United States, definitely. I went to an osteopathic medical school, and I remember my very first year, because I went to osteopathic medical school because I thought it was going to be more holistic. And I thought, okay, I'm going to learn all of these different techniques. I'm going to manipulate people's backs and also teach them about how to live healthy. But my very first year, what do they give me? A PDR. And I'm thinking, why am I getting a PDR full of all of these drugs? I don't even want to prescribe these, and it was just really disheartening to see, the channeling of where they're directing most physicians these days. More so on pharmaceuticals and surgery, less on, just using what God has given us in regards to food and everything else. But yeah, the pharmaceutical industry, especially the psychotropic drugs, I have seen them do so much damage in my family, and it's scary. I see no benefit whatsoever with those types of medications.
Yeah, there's a guy by the name of Peter Bregan. I think he's probably the greatest psychiatrist who ever lived. He said every single one of the psychiatric drugs causes a progressive lobotomy. The antipsychotics cause it rapidly, but all the rest of them cause it gradually. They all cause brain damage because they damage the synapses, and then the brain fights the drug. And in fighting the drug, it changes itself in a harmful way in the long run. And then they suppress all the research showing that people do better without it. Like, have you guys ever heard of soteria? Soteria is the Greek word for deliverance. They took a bunch of schizophrenic patients, and they started out doing it in California, San Francisco area, and they just had them in a residential home without drugging them. And they had residential supervisors that kind of helped them along as they were going through their difficult phases. And 85% of them were able to live a regular life, be able to live independently, have a job and, potentially have children and all that. Versus the ones that had taken the psychiatric medicines, only about 15% of them were ever able to return to independent living. So far better results without it. So the guy who was the supervisor of that project was called Lauren Mosher, okay? And he was the head of the NIMH at that time. So do you think they gave him a big reward? What do you think happened?
They probably
they declared he was biased against drugs, and they fired him.
Wow. Yeah, that's what they do. Can't go against big pharma. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I take antidepressants currently, but I'm working on trying to get off of them.
Yeah, you know who I like? I like Dr. Joseph. It's like Josef. He has a YouTube channel, and he specializes in titrating people off of those medications because I don't think long-term they do anything good. They're an excitotoxin in some ways. I'm not impressed by them. Plus, I showed you the papers when I started looking up Prozac. It's like, there's articles about it in chemotherapy journals recommending it to be used for chemotherapy because it's so toxic. It's insane.
Ew.
Ugh. That's gross.
And I ask just is for like I heard the discussion about omegas, like hemp seeds. If you're concerned about omegas, then you just eat a spoon of hemp seeds or like something like that. I don't know how much.
I kind of think it's a non-issue. I think you get enough fat. That guy Nathan Pritikin tells the truth, and he spent a long time going over all the lipid research up until his time, let's say to the early 1980s. I thought it was pretty convincing. They had populations where they fed less than 1% of calories from fat, and primarily omega-6 fats at that time, which the body needs more omega-6s than omega-3s. And people were doing really well. And on any naturally chosen diet, you're going to get enough. There's enough omega-3s in just low-fat plant foods. I think what they do is, in order to sell people a supplement, you have to hype up that all the deficiency issues. You got to convince them first they have a deficiency. Then you're like, and here's the solution, buy our supplement. And if you look closely at most of the people promoting omega-3s, you're going to see that they're selling it or they're partners with somebody who's selling it. I think it's a racket, basically.
It's same like for the protein, I think.
For sure.
Like growing muscles, all the whey protein, all this stuff that is all in all the gyms that I go. Like I see whey protein, clean isolated protein. I think
I think it's a bunch of BS. I think, well, you got to sell stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of problems with protein powders. Anytime you're selling a powder, there's a tremendous temptation to adulterate it with heavy metals, so it'll weigh more. You sell it for more money. Consumer Reports had a couple articles about protein
that's
powders
why they do it.
Being contaminated with, because they get more money. Throw some lead in there, it weighs more, sell it for more money.
Ooh.
Plus, you've now processed it into a powder, so you've broken up the individual proteins into their individual amino acids. So now you got more and more free glutamate. Glutamate is the excitatory neurotransmitter. 90% of the brain neurotransmitter in the cortex are glutamates. So now you got all these excitatory neurotransmitters flooding the gut, and they're too rapidly absorbed. They get high rate levels in the blood, and then they can get partial entry into the brain across areas that don't have a blood-brain barrier. And they're neurotoxins. They're excitotoxins. Now, we've got some ability to detoxify them, but we get into trouble when we start superimposing everything else on it, as people often do. With the processed food, the high-fat diets, what we talked about a moment ago.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alicia.
I have a question. This one's going to be for a broader audience because of the incidence of cancer these days, from which can be many reasons. What would be the impact of sugar for those with cancer?
I think the whole sugar thing with cancer is sort of distorted, okay? We need sugar. I mean, if we don't have sugar, the body makes some because the brain is dependent on it, the red blood cells and other body parts want it as well. So in order to, there's a couple ways to view cancer. I don't want to take too much time with this, but basically, conventional medicine always likes to tell everybody this disease is just due to aging. It's partly genetic, bad luck. There's nothing you can do. Just buy our pill. Okay. That's kind of like the way conventional medicine describes almost all the common chronic diseases. What I'm saying is when you look more carefully at cancer, I think a much better explanation most of the time is the metabolic theory of cancer. Like the Otto Warburg theory of cancer. He was a German biochemist, won the Nobel Prize in about 1931. He took tissue cultures and he would expose them to hypoxia. When he would deplete oxygen by 35% or more, some of the cells, a lot of them would die, but some of the cells would transform into cancer cells. And I think the gist of it is that a normal cell has a job. Like, let's say your liver cell. The liver cell has to do what a liver cell does. It has to make bile. It has to run metabolism, store glycogen, all that stuff. Maintain blood glucose level. Okay, and that takes tons of ATP energy. So it primarily makes energy and does a job. Versus a cancer cell is like a cell that says, hey, I don't got enough oxygen here. I can't make this much ATP. Johnny Paycheck song, take this job and shove it. Okay, screw it. I'm not working anymore. I'm not going to be a laborer all day long. You're not giving me the energy I need. And now it sort of reverts to becoming like a bacteria, almost like an anaerobic bacteria running primarily on anaerobic glycolysis. That's why PET scans are positive. They take up about 100 times more glucose, a cancer cell. But I think it's basically functioning like an anaerobic bacteria. I think what it relates to is at the origin of life, so to speak, in the earth, however many millions, billions of years ago, cells didn't initially have a 20% oxygen, 21% oxygen. It sort of waxed and waned, and they would develop the ability to switch back and forth from aerobic to anaerobic metabolism. So what I'm basically saying is they're reverting back to anaerobic metabolism, and then they're just becoming like a bacteria. They no longer care about functioning as part of an organ system. They just want to grow and replicate. So what I'm trying to say is a cancer cell is growth gone out of control. It's no longer interacting with its adjacent cells. It's just replicating out of control. And in order to replicate itself out of control, that cell needs a lot of stuff. It has to make a doubling of itself before it can split and divide. So it has to double all its nucleic acid, double all its proteins. So it needs tons of stuff. It needs lots of iron. It needs lots of protein. It needs everything to double itself. And so what I'm saying is glucose is primarily for energy. I think glucose is sort of a non-issue. The high carbohydrate starch-eating populations have very low rates of cancer. It's the high fat consuming populations that have high rates of cancer. And then there's other things supplemented into the diet, like, the iron fortification. That's really not in the best interest of the public because then people become iron overloaded. That also activates mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin, also called mechanistic target of rapamycin, which is a nutrient sensing pathway. It's like a building contractor. Waste still has all of its building blocks available, then it lets the cell replicate. So the amino acid composition to a meat is quite different. It's got a lot more methionine and leucine, which activate mTOR. So they stimulate growth. They're somewhat anabolic, you know.
Wow.
Interesting.
So if you knew somebody, hypothetically, I mean, I have people all around me. I have one with stage 4 colon metastasized. I have one who just, a neighbor who just now has pancreatic, which was secondary to bile duct cancer. And it's just like, what would you say to these people? I mean, mentally I hear, oh, turn off the sugar. But I also hear where there is oxygen, disease cannot be. So, I mean, what do you say?
I'll tell you what I personally would do. By the way, I wrote a book about this subject. I wrote a book called Poor Man's Guide to Fight Cancer.
Oh.
Yeah. And so what I would do is, you know, first of all, take a look at some of the people who have survived metastatic cancer. One of the most famous ones is Ruth Heydrich. Have any of you ever seen her before? She's pretty famous, really nice lady. She was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer at about 42 years of age. And she actually went to Dr. McDougall and she became a vegan on the spot. And they told her, make a will. You're probably going to be dead in 6 months. You know, get your affairs in order. And she said, screw you. I want to run a marathon. Okay. And so she was running marathons. She became a low-fat vegan. She's alive, you know, at 88 years of age, you know, as a low-fat vegan. She initially did the McDougall diet for a long time. Then she switched to being a raw vegan. She found that more convenient, and she prefers that. And she lives in Hawaii, which makes it easier to get all that fruit. But she's one example of it. There's another lady quite similar by the name of Lorraine Day, and she was pretty famous in her time. She's from the San Francisco area. She had a similar situation, diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, and she studied it, and she came to the conclusion, you got to go low-fat vegan. She's also very religious. She felt that was a big part of it. Filter your water. There's a lot of toxins in non-filtered tap water. She was alive, you know, about 35 years later, having had metastatic breast cancer, being told she was as good as dead. There's another lady who's pretty interesting. Her name is Janet Murray Wakelin. She's from Australia. And by the way, Lorraine Day wrote a book called I'm Not Afraid of Cancer. Cancer Doesn't Scare Me Anymore. And then Janet Murray Wakelin was pretty interesting as well. She wrote a book called Raw Can Cure Cancer. She's from Australia. And what she did was she studied it, read about it, and she's like, gee, these low-fat plant eaters, they're the ones that are living the longest. So she ended up going raw. That's why the book's called Raw Can Cure Cancer. And she had so much energy. She was a runner as well. And she and her husband ran around the perimeter of Australia. They ran a marathon every single day, 365 days in a row. So that's Janet Murray Wakelin. And I know she was alive about 22 years later with the same situation, metastatic breast cancer, being told, make a will, you're going to die. And so that seems to be a characteristic pattern. I think the exercise, what it does is, you know, the heart is connected to the arteries, which pump into the veins. And there's a pressure circuit behind it. Plus, there's other things in there. The vessels have some elasticity to facilitate pumping of the blood. But in the lymphatic system, which runs parallel to it, there is no pump. The pump is muscle movement. So what I'm saying is, I think it's this exercise. It increases lymphatic flow about 10 to 30-fold. That gets the white blood cells to circulate around the body, where they remove all the metastatic cancer cells. Because even a cancer cell, 1 centimeter cubic, can release about 1 million metastatic cells into the blood every day. It's your immune system that removes those. So you want your immune system to work. What makes your immune system work? A low-fat diet and exercise and getting your sleep.
So it seems like anything that promotes blood flow in an easy way, that's the perfect way to live. As long as your blood can get to a tissue and provide it nutrients and oxygen, that tissue is going to perform perfectly. And it's not going to accumulate maybe the toxins or the lack of oxygen that causes the hypoxia that might lead to these tissue changes. So is that, you know, basically what you're stating is that we need a low fat, you know, high carbohydrate diet just to kind of keep that blood flow?
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying is it's sort of like, I believe we should try to live like Adam and Eve, but, you know, keep our indoor heating and plumbing. Sort of simple old things that our ancestors probably did. And you see, medicine has a hard time with that because that's not good for money. For money, you want to say, this is disease number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're all different. Take this pill for the first one, this pill, this pill, this pill. That's yielded a pill and send a bill. That makes money. And you get the patient hooked on a pill for life. On the other hand, if you say, eat low-fat, low-sodium vegan and fix all your problems simultaneously, there's no money in that.
You know, like you talk about Kepner, the guy that put everybody on rice, and that was like a 95% carbohydrate diet, I think. does it really matter what the carbohydrate source is? I mean, could it be rice? Could it be fruit? Is there any preference, or is it just keep those carbohydrates as high as possible and keep the fat as low as possible?
I think in general, that's pretty much true. Starch is sort of a polymer of glucose. Fruit's got a lot more fructose in them. And I think fruits are actually better than a lot of people think. There's some controversy about fruits because of the fructose. But it's also, I think the high fructose corn syrup gets into the equation, and that makes things look bad. The actual fruits themselves, I think, are pretty good. I think we got color vision so we can see when a fruit is ripe. Carnivores don't need color vision. But I think that's the best diet, is the high carbohydrate, low fat, low protein diet. And I think there's a lot of reason to believe that. Kempner, in a sense, was putting people on a low protein, very low fat diet. There was a guy by the name, I think his name is James R. Mitchell. And I think he was a researcher at Harvard. He has a talk with this like Wilheimer Buchemi Clinic. It's on YouTube, the Wilheimer Buchemi Clinic or Wilhelm Buchemi Clinic. Anyways, I mention it because he was doing experiments on rodents, and he found that minimizing their dietary protein made them live longer. And it's thought that's probably because you don't activate mTOR. And the point of it was, people have all heard that if you have calorie reduction, that you get increased longevity. But calorie reduction doesn't sound too appealing. Nobody wants to starve. But the point that Mitchell's research was, you don't need to restrict calories. All you got to do is restrict protein, and you get the same effect. And it's you don't feel like you're missing out on anything. It's a winner, and it's pleasant.
So protein low, fat low. Would you say of those two, which one is more damaging to the body? I guess protein to the kidneys, but fat to the blood vessels. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I think fat's probably the worst thing. And McDougall would agree with that. Dr. McDougall said fat is the biggest toxin in the Western diet. And I think there's just intrinsically some problems with high intake of dietary fat. And I think they're all bad. And I think Alicia just mentioned a friend of hers who had metastatic colon cancer or something.
Yeah.
I know in the animal studies, the omega-3s showed increased colon cancer metastases to the liver. So that's another thing they do from their immune suppression. But I don't think you're going to win with that, And you look also some of these guys like the marathon runner, the Kipchoge, I think he's a Kenyan, black guy. He set the world record in the marathon. He's just below 2 hours. The point I'm saying is they eat tons of carbohydrate. The Tarahumara in northern Mexico, tons of carbohydrate. They're probably in the ballpark of 80-10-10, 80% carbohydrate, 10% protein, 10% fat. The Tarahumara, they eat tons of corn and some beans. And also the Kenyans also, they got lots of world champion marathon runners. So it provides great endurance. And that's good energy.
Yeah.
Simple food, yeah.
We had a question in the chat. Is Dr. Rogers familiar with anthelmintics like IVM? Fenbendazole?
So yeah, those are anti-parasite drugs. I don't have experience with those.
Interesting.
For fighting cancer. Who knows? Because I know kind of what they're getting at here. There's this movement afoot to recycle these like over-the-counter pharmaceuticals and use them to treat cancer. And I know there was one guy who wrote a book about that. His name might be Doc, D-A-C-H. I'm not sure about that. But all I can say is there might be something to it. I'm not that big a fan of drugs. It's sort of like when I went to med school, I was sort of convinced at that time, oh, gee, Maciel did a pill, send the bills, and it's wonderful, everything works. My experience with my father taught me quite something else. And then my extensive clinical experience since that time has taught me that most drugs don't work. I mean, what is a drug? I mean, you have replacement drugs, replacing thyroid hormone. Those are good, okay? Replacing insulin when you need it, that's good. But most other drugs, what they are is metabolic poisons, okay? And it's very difficult to poison your way to health. If you have an infection, you might need an antibiotic, but to get a differential treatment benefit, maybe it is. I don't have the experience with them to say, but I like all this diet and nutrition stuff because I think you only win with it. You don't get side effects from it.
Yeah.
It's interesting that was about parasites there with the last drug there, because that was my other question, was the role of parasites. And certainly I hold my hand up. I have had vegan as my a dietary intake before and I fell off that wagon due to poor energy. That's fine. But now I feel like what I most have to do is work on cognitively, maybe right, wrong, or indifferent parasites from eating all the meat and dairy and everything else. And is that over?
I don't know if you got parasites. Having parasites is quite different. That's more likely something you would get from having uncooked meat. But I don't know. I'm 60 years old, and I know my energy and my health dramatically improved the more I went down the vegan path. Initially, I was sort of a lacto vegetarian for many years, and then I became 100% vegan, and it's been good for me. I've been real happy with it, and mental clarity is good. Plus, the one thing I talk about, I have some lectures about preventing dementia and improving cognitive function, raising IQ, so to speak. And basically, I think what you want to do is you want to avoid all the stuff that's harmful, all the stimulants, avoid all that stuff, avoid all the mitochondrial inhibitors, and then avoid the high-fat diets and the sodium that are going to decrease oxygen delivery. So, for example, mitochondrial inhibitors. You go to all the standard biochemistry books. I own like about 7 of them, okay? And there's nothing in there about mitochondrial inhibitors, nothing, okay? Then you start going to the literature. I quickly found like 60 of them, and a lot of them are real common. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antidepressants are typically mitochondrial inhibitors. Atrazine, that's sprayed on corn, mitochondrial inhibitor. Okay, glyphosate that's sprayed on the soy, mitochondrial inhibitor. There are a lot of them are real common. High-fat diets, especially SAT-fat, mitochondrial inhibitor. BPA, mitochondrial inhibitor. All this stuff is real common. Cadmium, mitochondrial inhibitor. And so what I'm saying is people are getting, I think, nickel and dimed into cognitive decline. And so what's the answer? The answer is it's too complicated to figure it all out. So I think the escape strategy is to become a minimalist. And that's what I do. I just eat simple, single ingredient food. I'll have a sweet potato. I'll have a potato. I'll have a blueberry. And nothing where there's a whole bunch of ingredients. They're even allowed to stick stuff in the second ingredient if there's more than one ingredient. And that simplicity makes it doable because, otherwise we get overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's why you can live on 30 bananas a day.
I've been kind of surprised at some of those people. They seem like they're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And the food today is like hyper-palatable food. People are used to it like a lot, I think.
Yeah, they do test research to find the bliss point. How much MSG do we add? How much fat do we add frying? And then, other textures, flavorants, sodium and stuff. And it tastes good in the short term, but it doesn't sustain feeling good long term. And then what also happens is once you've tasted all that MSG, salted, fried stuff, then somebody gives you a plain old plant food and it's kind of disgusting. It's so boring and blah. But that's what the fasting comes in, I think, like breaking the pleasure trap, if you will, that your taste buds now are no longer hyper tuned to the hyper palatable processed food, and they're willing to try the plant food. I think fasting, especially in that context, could help somebody.
For me, it was also where I understood that there was a connection between the gut and the brain and then the colon. And those are 3 places that I just wanted to try to clean out.
Well, I don't think about cleaning it out so much as just feed the good guys with fiber and don't feed the bad guys with all the other junk. Basically, the good bacteria in your gut. And I think if you want to look at bacteria, I would just say there's 2 types. There's good bacteria and bad bacteria. The good bacteria are the ones fed by the fiber. And they take that fiber and they convert it into short-chain fatty acids, in particular butyrate, 4-carbon butyrate. That's taken up by the gut lining cells, the enterocytes. Enteric tract is the gut, so they're enterocytes. And then they use that to make tight junctions. And that prevents you from getting leaky gut. So that protects you against, irritable bowel syndrome. That protects you from Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, protects you from all the autoimmune diseases. Mm-hmm. But there's something else additionally beneficial. The butyrate, some of it goes in your blood up to your brain. And your brain lining cells, your blood-brain barrier, your endothelial cells, they also use that to make the tight junctions. So the butyrate maintains your blood-brain barrier. And so, and looking at it in the opposite direction, if you got leaky gut, it also means you probably have leaky blood-brain barrier. And then you've got an additional problem because what happens is when you got a leaky gut, then the bacterial endotoxins can get across, okay? Things like LPS from gram-negative bacteria, LTA from gram-positive bacteria. They get in the blood. These are bacterial endotoxins. So eating is called prandial. This is postprandial endotoxemia. And those endotoxins travel to your brain. Then because there's some leaky blood-brain barrier, they can get into your brain parenchyma. And then when they get into your brain parenchyma, your brain tissue, they can cause activation of your microglial cells. They're the macrophages, the immune system cells, the guards of the brain, okay? And so that once what they've got is what are called PRR, pattern recognition receptors. So when they bind to LPS, LTA, they say, uh-oh, we've got bacteria, incoming bacteria to the brain. We need to sterilize this area. So they release toxic chemicals, and that will cause damage, collateral damage to the adjacent brain cells. So you get microglial activation causing neuroinflammation. So what I'm basically saying is when you eat a low fiber diet of all these processed foods and oils and stuff, you get leaky gut, leaky blood-brain barrier, and subsequent neuroinflammation. And that's not good for cognitive function.
So how would it be fermented foods for trying to heal the gut and such, or what would be your?
Say just eat the plant food. They've got fiber. They've all got fiber. Fiber comes from plant foods. There's no fiber in animal foods. And I like the starches. I can tell you, Dr. McDougall recommended to eat 90% of your calories from starches, and then 5% from fruits and veggies. And I think he tends to deal with older populations of patients who came to him quite sick, and he just wanted to give them something simple that would work. I think younger people, healthier people, people who exercise more, they can certainly eat a lot more fruits. I eat about 35 to 40% of my calories from fruits. A lot of really healthy people do. And I'm happy with that. That's been working well for me on my numbers and how I feel. And I know a lot of people, they've done well eating even higher percentages than that. But I'm just letting you know, that's some of the debate there. The sort of the McDougall school of thought is 90% starch is only a tiny bit of fruits and veggies. And he'll say, there's no fruitarian population. Starch is the way to go. But again, if you're healthy, you're exercising, I think more fruit is fine.
And what are examples of starches for you?
Okay, well, I like potatoes, sweet potatoes, and white rice. And I think those are some of the best foods to start a person on because they have only 1% of calories from fat. The lower the percentage of calories from fat, the skinnier the population is going to be. And a lot of people want to lose weight. And losing weight tends to be very beneficial for treatment of diabetes and treatment of hypertension and treatment of atherosclerosis all around. So that's a fast way to do it. In terms of eating beans, I think the best bean is lentils because it's only 3% of calories from fat. Black beans are about 4% of calories from fat. So all of those things, they taste good, it's easy to eat them, and they make you thin and they minimize your risk of those other diseases. And they're also, you're going to have good oxygen delivery. So they're going to minimize your risk of cancer. What's not to like?
It's really fascinating because when I think of potatoes, I would think it's probably what people do to potatoes that make them seemingly fatty.
Yeah. I'd also say how you prepare them. I just boil them. Okay, that's easy to do. I just boil them, and then for making the rice, I just put it into a pressure cooker, like an Instapot. Push the button.
Yeah, Instapots are awesome.
10 minutes.
I really love Instapot.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about B12, and we saw a video a couple weeks ago that we haven't been able to research it that much. It's a short video. I'd love to watch it again just to get your opinion of it. It goes back to what you were saying earlier about, things becoming products and people selling, products that we might not necessarily need. But this is a pretty interesting video.
Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road.
Follow the yellow brick road to the magical land of B12, where one magic supplement will bring you back from the brink of insanity and death and cure every disease you've ever had or ever wanted to have, even cancer. Is it a placebo, you may ask, or some type of snake oil? No, it's B12, and it breaks all the rules of nature. But first, before we worship at the altar of B12, let's find out how this magical, crucial, essential bacteria vitamin supplement was first created. From the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine study, Recognizing, Treating, and Understanding Pernicious Anemia, published in 2008 on the government's prestigious National Institute of Health website, comes this fascinating and sketchy history of how B12 originated and was eventually marketed to vegans as that one magical bacteria vitamin supplement that nature forgot to provide in plants or pre-existing in the human body. By the way, it doesn't say anything about B12 being found in the dirt or water.
That is one big thing.
Vitamin B12 was initially created as an alleged cure for pernicious anemia. The first case diagnosed as such was in 1824. Although the cause was never investigated, the patient, who subsequently died, exhibited all the symptoms of food poisoning, possibly shellfish poisoning, inflamed stomach mucous membranes, diarrhea, extreme thirst, and vomiting. Not coincidentally, the same doctor who diagnosed this case, British surgeon Dr. James Combe, published a paper a few years later on that very subject called The Poisonous Effects of Eating Mussels. It turns out that the mussel beds in that particular city where the patient died were located really close to the sewage outlets. In other words, the patient was not suffering from any lack of vitamin or beneficial bacteria, but most likely from having been poisoned by sewage-tainted shellfish. This one case apparently set off a whole chain reaction of doctors trying to find a cure for this pernicious anemia without even knowing the cause. One clueless doctor even tried treating patients with arsenic. But it wasn't until a vivisection experiment in the 1920s, using dogs who had been bled out to simulate an anemic condition, these dying dogs were fed raw cow's liver. Although there was no proof how long it actually extended their lives, it was deemed a cure. The raw liver was then fed to 45 human patients in a trial, most of whom dropped out because they found eating the liver incredibly disgusting. Nevertheless, the experiment was considered a success, even though fruit and iron pills were also included in the diet. It's also not clear how closely they were monitored. The doctors even admitted themselves that it was inconclusive with such a small group of people and with other food being given. It should also be noted that all doctors involved received Nobel Prizes. So it was then marketed as a supplement, a raw liver extract, to make it more palatable to the public. But it still just did not sell well enough. So they decided to switch the market over to farmers to give this crap to their animals, marketing it as a miracle cure for anemia. Basically, the farmers were now feeding herbivorous animals their own organs, essentially making them cannibals. The farmers made excellent customers, as they did not question if the stuff worked or not, and they bought it in bulk as an antibiotic. But the makers of this extract did not give up trying to sell it to humans. This was where the real money was to be made. So, extracts of raw liver were sold as intramuscular injections throughout the 1950s. And it was in 1948 that this extract of raw cow liver, now with kidneys also added in, was officially given the name vitamin B12 and touted as a cure for pernicious anemia. Again, all doctors involved received Nobel Prizes. So let's review. This extract of cow liver, sold as vitamin B12, was never obtained from dirt or water, as many vegans now are taught to believe. It was derived from the raw liver of a cow to treat what was most likely simple food poisoning, with absolutely no proof that it was effective or necessary. The whole concept of this product was based on the theory that animal organs are beneficial to humans. And of course, when veganism started showing signs of exponentially growing, that became the perfect consumer group to target. After all, vegans were obviously deficient in animal products, and especially the newer, less competent vegans could easily be persuaded that they needed to supplement with something that plants could not provide. And it was pure marketing trickery to label the product as a vitamin, so as to bypass regulations that a drug approval would have required. One of the very few known pioneers questioning B12 as far back as the 70s was Dr. Vivian Vetrano, who lived to be 91 years old as a vegan, who never supplemented. She said, if vitamin B12 is not in fresh fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes, and if bacteria does not manufacture in the body where humans can absorb it, then we don't need it. The only other explanation is that nature made a great big mistake. Do you think nature made a great big mistake? I don't. I believe humans are 100% herbivores that require only plants for nutrients. And when it's claimed that you used to be able to obtain this mysterious bacteria vitamin from the dirt and the water, how many decades has it been since anybody last ate a fruit or vegetable that they hadn't meticulously washed off first? And when was the last time you got your water from a fresh mountain stream? So if everything is so sanitized and the soil so depleted now, how the hell are we still able to get all the other essential vitamins, nutrients, and beneficial bacteria from plants that grow in it, except for this magical B12? And why isn't B12 available from the same plant sources as the other B-complex vitamins? The soil and water explanation seems to be something that vegans have added on to explain why it's no longer available in the vegan diet. But it makes no sense. Once you follow the money trail of B12 and how it came to demonize the perfection of a vegan diet, you will see it leads directly back to pharma, who manufacture it, and the meat and dairy industry, who want you to buy their animal products. Why does the vegan society tell vegans it's dangerous not to take B12? Because they're making money selling the supplements. The truth is that these synthetic supplements are made in the same drug labs that make vaccines, using the cheapest toxic waste byproducts to maximize profit. Sources of the bacteria include dairy whey, which is waste from the dairy industry, activated sewage sludge, coal tar, and strains used to make dangerous antibiotics like synthetic penicillin and streptomycin. As for the list of deficiency symptoms, these could apply to 20 other medical conditions. Just the side effects of taking B12 are much more frightening. The B12 patch has a listed warning that it can cause blood clotting and heart failure. The supplements cause skin toxicity with outbreaks of severe acne, as well as increased risk of cancer, as shown in 2 recent studies.
What do you think about that?
Well, a couple thoughts. The first one is there's a guy by the name of Joseph Chandy. He's an Indian guy who worked in in England in their health system, and he wrote a book about B12. And he was convinced that most people, there's a tremendous number of people that are deficient in B12. And I thought it was a pretty good book. It didn't seem like he was using a financial angle to sell it. I've also seen, for example, my own B12. If I don't take the B12 supplements, which I do take periodically, my B12 level goes down. I never had any symptoms from it. I can tell you that it's super rare to see an overt symptomatic B12, like to have an abnormal spine MRI, subacute combined degeneration, or one of these problems from B12 deficiency in the brain. That's super, super rare. But it's in all the textbooks and stuff. I think that a person can kind of see where their B12 level is at, and I think it's probably a good idea to supplement, because I'd be a little bit nervous about it getting too low. The story McDougall tells is that it's made by the bacteria. Nowadays, they spray more herbicides and pesticides and whatnot, and fertilizers on the soil that damage those bacteria, and that's why you don't get it so much from your plants, and people do tend to wash them off more. Or let's say you get a salad. They soak those salads, those triple wash salads, ready to eat. They soak them in chlorine and other chemicals, and maybe that's wiping out the bacteria that make it. So I do take, methylcobalamin. I would never take anything with cyano, and I think that sounds to me stupid. I know a lot of people recommend it. I think that sounds to me crazy. It's a strong mitochondrial inhibitor. But that's where I'm at. And I have heard, I know Nelson made one video about, do high levels maybe increase your risk of cancer? I don't know. I have seen a lot of times they put stevia in it. And stevia, I think, is a toxic substance that causes infertility. I think that's another one of those big tricks. Or one of those, there's a whole group of chemicals that I believe are being added commonly to foods in order to sterilize the pearls.
Isn't stevia a plant?
I think it's a plant. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but
I think, isn't it?
Sweet leaves. I had it I grew it at home. Yeah,
Oh,
leaves, and they make artificial sweeteners, I think, for coffee. But I think if you eat from just the leaves, it's really sweet taste. Yeah, but yeah, just
one of my thoughts is that because we have gut bacteria that produce vitamin B5, vitamin K, and we absorb that into the blood. So I'm thinking perhaps, if we eat a species appropriate diet long enough, maybe we create the correct microbiome that would start producing vitamin B12, and then we would absorb that into our blood. And therefore, we would not need the vitamin B12 in that case. I don't know. That's just a theory.
I think there are some people who don't seem to need to supplement. They maintain pretty good blood levels.
She got her blood
I wonder about it. There's another guy by the name of William Walsh, and he wrote a book called Nutrient Power, How to Heal Your Biochemistry and Heal Your Brain. And he studied the blood labs on tens of thousands of patients, and he claims that he's had very good results. Once he's got the blood labs, he claims that he can figure out these patients' so-called undermethylation, overmethylation. I don't know if he's exaggerating or not. Probably is, but he claims that there's been a lot of research showing that a lot of patients with mental illnesses, including depression, schizophrenia, and whatnot, that sometimes improve a lot when you give them vitamin B12, as well as things like niacin, vitamin B6, sometimes zinc. And again, I don't know how good all of that stuff is, but I'm making the point that he does claim a therapeutic benefit from it. And then there's also something I think is a little funny about it. Like, all these psychiatric drugs are very dangerous. I think they're a bad idea, 100%. And it seemed to me, what he reminded me of is the Voltaire quote, where Voltaire had said, "The doctor amuses the patient while nature heals them." And I say that because back when they didn't use any drugs at all to treat depressions, they had much better results than they do now when they use them with drugs. So this guy messing around, take a little niacin, a little B6, a little B12, possibly was just a harmless incidental placebo, and they ended up with the same results as not doing anything at all, which was a lot better than with the drugs. So it seems like it's a great thing.
Funny.
It's like when all the doctors went on strike, and then mortality rates started to decrease.
There are B12 that you can take sublingual, and you can absorb it right underneath your tongue, and that would be beneficial if you've got any gut issues, because there's a whole sequence of events that have to happen for gut absorption, and you could have a problem, let's say, with your stomach acid, and that might lead to less B12 absorption.
Yeah.
I've
I had
seen
to
them.
quit supplementing B12.
What's
I'm
that?
sorry, what?
I had to quit
Oh,
supplementing
You
B12
had to
because my
quit.
levels were too high.
Oh, too high. Yeah.
Sure.
Not surprised.
I mean, it's interesting how they'll have some people have injections, particularly with like chronic fatigue and things like that. I have actually seen also transdermal patches of methylcobalamin,
Yikes.
which
Yeah.
was interesting.
Yeah,
On the Raw Food Network or the Raw Food World.
Well,
yeah.
a lot of people get obsessive about supplementing too, you know. And so I could see it, you know, if you're really overly hyperly fixated on supplementation, I could totally see, you know, that happening where you go to the doctor and they're like, whoa, chill, you know, because it is all kind of toxic shit if you take too much of it, seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever
The
you
only thing
whenever you
else-
overdose on one thing, you start running all these side reactions that are not healthy. One thing you mentioned, chronic fatigue syndrome, and one thing I think kind of interesting about that, there's a guy by the name of Martin Pall, P-A-L-L. So Martin Pall, PhD guy who came up with this detailed research about something called the nitric oxide peroxynitrite pathway, the no pathway. He wrote an entire book on it. He's got a bunch of YouTube lectures. Okay, the relevance is he believes that's the main issue happening with chronic fatigue syndrome. He also believes that's the main issue happening with congestive heart failure. And he kind of paints this cycle as this, you know, unstoppable vicious cycle. And once this gets going, you're screwed and all this. But what I thought was interesting, there's been a couple of case reports the last couple of years about reversal of congestive heart failure with vegan diets. And so what I'm saying is I think this whole no cycle is largely sort of an end stage event. Like, you know, in a basketball game and one team's ahead by 30 points, and there's only 5 minutes left. We call it garbage time. It's sort of like the final common pathway at the end. But, you know, the way you could respond to that is, you know, the things that cause it, the more initial events in the pathology. So what I'm saying is the guys who wrote the case reports on congestive heart failure reversal with a plant-based diet, one of his name is Robert Ostfeld. He's a cardiologist in New York at Montefiore. So Robert Ostfeld, you can look that up, reversal of congestive heart failure with plant-based diet. And then the other guy is Baxter Montgomery, who wrote the same thing, several case reports, congestive heart failure. And that's actually a big deal because if you can reverse congestive heart failure, chronic fatigue syndrome of the heart, maybe you could reverse it in other parts of the body is what I'm thinking. This might be, and that's why I joked. I actually made a video about that. It was like the siege on a castle, you know, being unstoppable of Martin Pall's literature. And then here these guys come along and they cure congestive heart failure. And, you know, I think maybe that could be very beneficial for chronic fatigue syndrome and some of these other related diseases. It's just that, you know, conventional medicine totally ignores vegan diet. They pretend it doesn't exist, but it's actually, I think, the most powerful thing there is in health.
Fibromyalgia is another one, another bucket of we don't know. So we'll call
right.
it.
And, you know, is it the Martin Pall thing, end stage pathway? There's other theories of fibromyalgia as well. One of them is intracranial hypertension. You know, I don't know if we want to get into all that, but there's other theories. Yeah.
I've never heard of congestive heart failure being connected to chronic fatigue syndrome. So it's just the heart being fatigued that's the theory that's connecting those two?
Right. Yeah. The guy's name is Martin Pall. It's spelled P-A-L-L. I think he's an Asperger autism genius. He's partly biologist, partly physicist. And he basically says once you get farther along in these pathways, they end up having all kinds of vicious cycle, and the cells just sort of spiral down into fatigue and death. Okay. And he acted like it's unstoppable, but that's because he doesn't know anything about nutrition. If you just prevent those pathways from being initiated, or you break the vicious cycle, you can preventively reverse it. And so what I'm getting at here is a bigger idea too. I think a tremendous amount of disease is partly caused or contributed to by mitochondrial damage. And you can damage mitochondria, as we spoke about earlier, with the high-fat diets and the high-sodium diets, causing tissue hypoxia. So that's one way to do it. But then, like I just mentioned a moment ago, when I started looking at the mitochondrial inhibitors, I quickly found 60 of them, and they're very common, many of them. Tylenol is a mitochondrial inhibitor. Almost all your antibiotics, beta-lactam penicillins, mitochondrial inhibitors, aminoglycosides, mitochondrial inhibitors, and statins are mitochondrial inhibitors. I thought that was kind of funny. And so is metformin. Metformin is a mitochondrial inhibitor. So what a bunch of BS it is. What are we doing here? We're damaging the cell's ability to produce energy. We're screwing the cell. We mess up its mitochondrial function with all these inhibitor drugs, and then on top of it, we eat a high-fat, high-sodium diet, not giving it adequate blood flow. So the cell is kind of screwed. It's trying to fight back. And so what I'm saying is give it what it needs and get out of the way.
That actually seems to make cognitive sense, where if you do have chronic fatigue, because it's a battery that is on low, and if you exert, then you seem to go backwards. So it's almost such a false start. It's a really terrible position. I've been there in the past. It's a horrible situation to be in there. Time healed for me, but that seems to make sense that it could be linked to the heart. That's just wow.
Right. So what they essentially say is, look, you're screwed. Take our pill. We're not sure it'll work, but it's worth a try. Rather than saying, okay, what are the most important thing is, what are the initiating causative events? You know, the end stage, end of the line, that doesn't really matter that much. Okay, it's too late by then. The horse is out of the barn. What matters is, how can we prevent this from happening? And when you start going through the nutritional components, what you'll see is, you know, you've got multiple converging poisons destroying the cell. So stop the poisons, you know. But there's no money in that type of thinking. That's all, you know, that and $1.50 gets you right on the bus.
Fun fact, I mean, it was a long time ago that I was on that train, and not one doctor talked to me about what I was eating.
Yeah.
They don't know anything about nutrition in med school. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nutrition, epidemiology, toxicology, the three most important things are not taught in med school.
Oh, this is just shocking. Yeah.
When I interned with Joel Furman, I really came to understand natural hygiene. Are you familiar with that, Dr. Rogers?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, natural hygiene, it includes water fasting, but it basically includes using nature, using the foods that, you know, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and letting nature heal the body, and getting good sun exposure, having healthy relationships. So just kind of creating the perfect environment to create health. But they oppose all drugs, all pharmaceuticals, because they see them as toxic. So keeping toxins out of your body, and, you know, using things like water fasting to let the body kind of heal and to reset, if you will, and just staying on a path of not taking in any toxins. So it just seems like everything, you know, because I learned that, I want to say maybe 1998. And since I've left, or not left, but since I've, you know, left medicine, I guess, the more I get into learning about health again, it just seems like it comes back to that. You know, we don't want to go down this path of using drugs, a pill for every ill, and, you know, cutting the chest open to, you know, remove a vein in the leg to put it on the heart. It just seems crazy that we do these things in the name of health, when there is such an easier way to let the body heal if we allow it to happen.
Yeah, there's sort of like two separate paths I see you going on down there, but I'll make a comment on this, okay? And people sometimes get pissed off at me. I'm just going to tell you what I think the truth is. I believe that the whole country, and the Western world to a large extent, has shifted to a mindset of what I would call atheistic Darwinism. My father's from Ireland, which is partly why I take this so seriously, that England was very eager to adopt Darwin's theory of evolution as a way to explain human relationships as well. And they said, you know, the Herbert Spencer quote, survival of the fittest, okay? Might is right, and, you know, the law of the jungle, and basically whatever country or population was more powerful had the right to do whatever it wanted. England, of course, wanted that because they're very much of an imperial power in the you know, 1800s. And so it enabled them to basically treat the Irish like slaves. And I'm getting at something bigger here. If you say a human is simply a primate, like a chimpanzee that talks, which is how we've been labeled in the Western world, that's what they teach in the high schools, the colleges, and the grad schools, that you're just a talking primate. You have no soul. Religion is all a joke. There is no God. There is no afterlife. You're just a talking monkey. Well, a talking monkey has no intrinsic rights, versus if you go to a Bible-based worldview and you say, man is created in the image of God, therefore part divine as well as part beast, therefore entitled to our consideration, our kindness, our respect, because he's not like the other beasts. He's something special. And the significance right there is that if you look at open heart surgery, that bill is $150,000, including the operating room, the post-procedural care. $150,000. You look at stenting, $30,000 for each stent. That's a lot of money. All right. What is the increase in longevity for the typical coronary artery disease patient with stenting and with open heart surgery? 0%. It's 0%. 0%. Okay, what is the increase in longevity? What is the cure rate for the vegan diet, like the low-fat vegan diet of Caldwell Esselstyn? It's 100%. Okay, the one patient who failed in the study didn't follow his diet. Okay, he said he just included to make it look better, his results. But he said the truth of the matter is everybody who followed it, none of them had a single recurrent cardiovascular event. So what I'm saying is, if you go with the low-fat vegan diet, I realize most patients wouldn't be willing to do it, but if you go with the low-fat vegan diet, you can only bill about $1,000, maybe $4,000 at the most to educate the patient versus $150,000. So a hospital that runs on money and views the patient as a talking monkey, they're always going to want open heart or the stent. There's just too much money to be gained by it. So the only thing that could change this is that you have to love the patient in a sense and say, create an image of God. The individual is the most important thing. And Ayn Rand had said something similar. If you guarantee individual rights, you guarantee all rights. Hazel Christus said, that what you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me. And unless we're willing to go back to that foundation of values, it's always going to be 100 times more profitable to lie and trick the stupid talking monkey. And so you can't fix medicine. No medical, surgical, technology, bullshitology is ever going to change that. So the whole system kind of becomes a joke. And that's the only thing that could fix it. And people don't want to admit that. That's why it's not getting fixed. And big money don't want it to happen because they're the alpha, powerhouse at the top who can do whatever they want. So they're going to keep it atheistic Darwinism. So I don't think it's actually going to get better. It's just going to be a few individuals who educate themselves.
Oh my God, bullshitology. You just that is just amazing. So then all these people that are going for even the likes of keto and what is trending and everything, they're just marching themselves off of a cliff, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's pretty stupid. Because, we just talked about the problems with high-fat diets. They suppress your immune system. They cause insulin resistance. They cause hypertension. They cause atherosclerosis. How are you going to get healthy by plugging up your arteries? They make you constipated. They don't have any dietary fiber.
How is it that we see, I see in some chat groups where they'll say, oh, I went all animal this or that, whether or not it's organic, grass-fed, whatever. And then they seem, I don't know if it's psychological or whatever, they seem to have this like blip where I feel better. Where can that possibly come from?
I think you got something called like a Hawthorne effect. A Hawthorne effect means whenever somebody is watching themselves real carefully in the beginning of doing something new or part of a study, they can sort of optimize all kinds of little details in life and get a short-term benefit, but it's not sustainable long-term. And, the paleo, keto, carnivore stuff, there can be some small advance. Like, let's say they previously were eating a lot of processed food or things like that, and they quit that. That can step them in the right direction. And they'll initially lose weight as their liver clears out its glycogen, for example. But long-term, it's not.
Well, I mean, you are such a poster child. I mean, your brain is just I mean, you are the absolute poster, adult, not child, of this. It's a wonder just watching you and how you spit this out. I mean,
this guy puts out 3 videos a day too.
Yeah, but you also notice my YouTube channel's ostracized on YouTube. Okay, it's shadow banned. Okay. Yeah. You notice that most of the vegan community won't interview me because they're pissed off because I tell the truth. And I actually think McDougall's legacy is being replaced. They're trying to sweep it under the carpet. And instead of going with the low-fat veganism, they're trying to push what I would call moderate to almost high-fat veganism because they want to sell all this stuff. They want to sell omega-3s. They want to sell olive oil. They want to sell nuts and seeds and chia and even some canola oil. They want to say MSG is okay. They want to say caffeine, coffee, tea is okay. So they're trying to sell all this stuff because that's where the money is. My situation is because I just do it as a hobby. I'm not monetized. I'm free to tell the truth. It's not. So I think that gives me an advantage. And that's partly why I keep doing it because I know I'm right and I'm trying to do good. And so I just sort of say, okay, go ahead, shadow ban me. I'll accept my lowered view counts. But in the long run, you'll see that I'm right and I'm telling the truth. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from.
Speaking the truth is the only way to go. I mean, I didn't even monetize my YouTube channel. 50% of my videos have been taken down. So I have my backup Odyssey channel. But do you have a backup channel, Dr. Rogers?
Well, I'm going to go to one of those other ones if they boot me off. But for now I do YouTube because I still work full time, so I don't have a lot of time, and I spend a lot of time writing books, which I just enjoy doing. but I can see they're always trying to block me one way or the other. And I'll tell you one funny story where I got in trouble at a university. You might find this amusing. I was writing a chapter on leaky gut, and one of the things that's talked about, for increased intestinal permeability is to do a fecal transplant. Like if a wife had leaky gut, she could have a colonoscopy placed up her rectum and the feces of her husband made into a slurry and injected up the colonoscope. So I said, why go through all that? Why doesn't she just kiss her husband's ass, take a little shit from him? I was just kidding, Okay, a professor at a university said, Dr. Rogers is misogynist and patriarchal. He should not be allowed to speak to the medical students. And they canceled my lectures. It's not a joke. Isn't that ridiculous? That's the kind of BS that's happening.
Yeah, highbrow. It's sad.
Yeah, it's BS. And they obviously are, it's just a pretext. It's nonsense.
Yeah. You're not going to learn any truth in an academic environment. You're going to learn how to, climb the ladder and, how to BS your way to get a good job, but that's about it.
Yeah,
yeah, it's like the truth. People who tell the truth should not be concerned about popularity so much. I mean, because it's gonna offend people. The truth, but if you have a secret motive to sell it, then people want to hear good news about the bad habits, right? So they like how to say content creators that pander to their bad habits. Yeah, I think.
I didn't hear what happened to you. Your dad was a doctor?
Yeah, my dad was a doctor. He's a psychiatrist. And what had happened was my girlfriend and I had split. I was in love with her. I was sad about that. And then I didn't like med school as much as I had hoped I would. So I was just sad. It's a normal thing to be sad. Sometimes a person was sad. I was first in my class. I was doing fine. I coached the wrestling team. But my father's like, you're sad too long. He's a psychiatrist. And he goes, I think you need to take antidepressants. And I don't know if you want me to go through all this, but he started pushing Prozac on me because the drug trials, the clinical trials were so good. And I'm like, get out of here. I'm just sad. Leave me alone. But he kept pushing me. My father at that time was my hero. He was kind of my role model. And I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I figure he knows what he's doing. He's sort of a kind of a famous psychiatrist, big shot, chief of 2 departments. And so he gave me Prozac. And I was now a third-year medical student. And I'm like, gosh, I feel terrible. It's making me sick. He goes, just try it a couple more weeks. And he goes, oh, I think we've unmasked a bipolar. Now you need to take lithium. And he goes, you're not sleeping well. Now you need to take Xanax. I'm like, get the F out of here. You're crazy. And he goes, just try it for a couple of weeks. I talked to my mother. I was very upset and sad about it. And I kept getting sicker and worse. And then finally I told my dad, everything you said is not true, Dad. I think you're a fraud. I think you're a phony. I was a pretty strong wrestler guy back in those days. And he said, well, just try it a couple more weeks. I'm going to put you on an additional antidepressant. I think there'll be a synergistic effect from nortriptyline, a traditional tricyclic. I said, F you. I grabbed him by his collar. I took him, tipped his chair back, and I took the pill box. I held him. He goes, if you ever try to make me take another psychiatric drug, I will shove it down your throat. And that was the end of that. Luckily, I didn't have any withdrawal symptoms.
Wow.
But that was where I got my clinical experience to learn that psychiatry was bullshit. I subsequently read about it more later, but it's much worse even now that I know more about it later. Yeah, my father was following me around the house trying to poison me. I'm like, get away from me. There was nothing wrong with me. I was just sad. It's a normal reason to be sad.
Yeah.
That's my girlfriend.
That's so wild. How you been though, man? You've had a gnarly year.
Yeah, I sort of feel like, in life you say I'm half screwed, but at least I'll do the best I can with the ways that I'm not screwed. So that's kind of been my approach, and you have to be resilient. Like remember Joseph Campbell, the old hero's journey, 2 steps up, 1 step back, 2 steps up. Sometimes 2 steps back, but you keep going. And I think in the long run, you'll be fine. And it's sort of, I have resilience too, because I know I'm right. I know I'm doing something good, and I know it needs to be done. So it's sort of like I will continue, even though I sort of know they're never going to let me become famous, but I still know I can still do good with what I've got. And like I said, if they ban me off YouTube, I'll go to the other channels. So
there is BitChute, I think. It's also okay. But yeah. It's not censored. Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping that there's going to be some kind of revolution where the truth tellers are going to actually gain popularity, and we're going to turn the ship around. I mean, there's a lot of people that say the truth, like Mark Passio, that are not well known, and people don't even know these names. I mean, I didn't even know about you until Jeffrey brought your name up. I'm like, and then I started watching your videos. I'm like, holy cow! I was just, I mean, you're just like the perfect YouTube video creator, because you go into such depth and you bring the research, you bring the scientific and medical background, and you're not afraid to speak. You're not selling anything, so it's perfect.
So I sort of also noticed the same things that make me screwed and make me ostracized are also what make me good. And so I'll just keep going with it, and do the best I can. But I don't have an illusion. I don't think I'll ever be welcome, but at least I still feel good about it, so I'll keep doing it. Because I figured out a lot of stuff. My theory of neurodegeneration is the best one, but all the money goes into this BS about Alzheimer's, which is a fake disease. And I've read on the subject rather extensively. Probably the best book is How Not to Study a Disease. They made up all this nonsense about Alzheimer's just to get more funding, and they got billions of dollars. These Alzheimer's institutions, institutes, and it's all a big joke. It's not even a real disease.
You call it type 3 diabetes, don't you?
Well, you can call it type 3 diabetes, but there sort of is the familiar version of Alzheimer's. But what I thought was interesting about the typical common sporadic Alzheimer's is there's no question you can ask the patient to diagnose it. There's no physical exam findings. You don't put a stethoscope on them and confirm you got Alzheimer's. There's no blood test. The imaging stuff is BS. I look at I'm a neuroradiologist, is one of the main things I do. I look at many thousands of brains. I almost never see the characteristic pattern of medial temporal atrophy and parietal lobe atrophy. So that's BS. Nuclear medicine test is not that effective either. So you say, well, they can diagnose it at autopsy. It turns out very often at autopsy they can't diagnose it either. And then what's the treatment? They got, Aricept and a few other stupid drugs that don't work. So what I would say is, if you have a disease you can't diagnose when the patient's alive, and you can't diagnose it when they're dead, and you don't have any treatment, what kind of disease is that? That's a bullshit disease. Okay, it's nonsense. All right. And then there's very good reasons to understand what causes neurodegeneration. The dilatory theory. Okay, my theory, supply and demand theory, and there's a couple other ones. The Yamashima theory, the Kellan-Pretorius theory. And that's useful stuff, and it tells you exactly what to do. But that doesn't ever get into any of the books.
Can you go into your supply and demand theory? I don't think I've heard that one. Okay,
well, yeah, basically, I alluded to it earlier, but basically you've got a baseline metabolic rate of a neuron. Okay, that's how much oxygen glucose it needs to produce energy. And it needs to do that to stay alive. Then you have oxygen and glucose. Normally they're coupled, the amount of blood supply. But we talked about if you eat the high-fat diet and the high-sodium diet, you vasoconstrict and you go into low formation, the red blood cells stick together, you drop oxygen delivery. And then you start giving stimulants. You can give stimulants in the form of MSG, manufactured free glutamate in the processed food, caffeine. So you ramp up metabolic rate. The bigger this gap, the more likely a cell is going to die by apoptosis. And then they're eating a processed food, which is going to have mitochondrial inhibitors, mold inhibitors. Plus the patient could be taking medicines. Okay. Plus you're talking on a cell phone, you're opening up voltage gated calcium channels. All of these things increase calcium in the cytoplasm, which is the activator of a neuron. Then you need the ATP to pump the calcium out, because you're always pumping against a gradient. The extracellular tissue is like 10,000 times higher concentration of calcium. So what I'm saying is the neuron is double, triple, quadruple screwed. Its metabolic rate is ramped up. Then its oxygen and glucose delivery is diminished. And then its mitochondria are inhibited. The neuron's screwed. It can't meet its metabolic demand. Once its metabolic demand gets too far beyond its ability to meet it, it just dies, goes into apoptosis. And that's why when I look at all these brains, what do I see in all these cognitively impaired brains? I see atrophy, just a shrunken brain. And what's going to do that? You can't see that at autopsy, by the way. All you'll see is just the brain is shrunken. And so the perfect explanation, the perfect crime, if you will, is this. Plus the psychiatric drugs are doing the same thing, functioning as excitotoxins and mitochondria inhibitors. And so the only way to win this game is stop all the mitochondria inhibitors, decrease dietary fat and sodium, and decrease your stimulants. That makes your brain cells happy.
Are those what you're talking about when you talk about what is it? Estrogens, androgenic estrogens or something?
Oh yeah, but there's something very interesting about estrogens. There's a guy by the name Gil Cirolini, and he went through the literature on the endocrine disrupting chemicals, primarily estrogenic chemicals. And what he found was virtually almost all of them are neurotoxic. 80% of them are directly neurotoxic, and another 20% are indirectly neurotoxic at some time in development because they're anti-thyroid. And so those things are ubiquitous because they tend to be mold inhibitors as well. So they put them in, like all the deodorants, the personal care products. And so these are other examples of how basically society is being poisoned on a wide scale, and they're typically slow poisons which give plausible deniability to the long-term effects, things like infertility and cancer.
Yeah, estrogen is ubiquitous. I mean, it's in everything. And I was listening to a Nathan Pritikin lecture on McDougall's website recently, and he mentioned how some little girl got into her mother's estrogen cream, and she was like 4 years old and rubbing it all over her body, and then later started developing, breasts, at a young age. And it's a hydrophobic drug. It just gets. Does it work that way? Like when it's in, bottling and other types of manufacturing?
Well, I think the key thing is in the armpits. The upper outer quadrant breast cancer used to be 30%. Now it's 60% of breast cancer. And the main thing happening is the deodorant. So with the deodorant, what happens is a typical preservative is something like a parabenzoic acid, an estrogenic chemical, because it's antimicrobial. Okay, they also have aluminum in there, which is a metalloestrogen. They activate the breast ductal cells to proliferate. And then you have shared lymphatics between your armpit and the upper outer quadrant of the breast. And a lot of women, they shave their armpit before they put their deodorant on. So they're putting 2 estrogenic chemicals every day on their armpits and shaving it to increase transdermal absorption. And chemistry like dissolves like. Your tissue subcutaneous, primarily lipid. And estrogen is a lipid. Okay, so it's transdermally absorbed right into those lymphatics shared with that upper outer quadrant. And so it's a bad idea. People don't need deodorant. By the time a man sniffs your armpit, he already wants you. Okay.
Women definitely don't need deodorant.
Yeah, you say, hey, how you doing? You don't sniff each other's armpit like a dog.
If you eat right, you're gonna smell better.
Well, that's actually true too.
Yeah.
So this big push from multiple directions to cause what I would call feminization of the population. And number one, like in the tap water, there's all these estrogenic chemicals because they don't carbon filter it all. They say it's too expensive. So you're ingesting all these estrogenic chemicals, from PCBs to another woman's birth control pills, all these preservatives, to the BPA, the phthalates from the plastic, etc. So you're estrogen overloaded from the tap water. You're estrogen overloaded from all the preservatives in your personal care products, in detergents, in your laundry soap, etc., in your shampoos, in your soaps, etc. Also, then you're eating a high meat diet, and the high meat diet changes the gut flora, so you get more glucuronidase, and you basically unconjugate your estrogen. Normally, you defecate excess estrogen out of your body, but you don't defecate it out when you're not eating enough dietary fiber, you're eating all the meat food. So you can see you're loading up on estrogen from the preservatives, from the water, from the detergents, all the soaps, all the personal care products. You're unable to excrete it because you don't have the dietary fiber on board. You can see it's adding up quite a bit. They add aluminum to the water, a metalloestrogen. It's added to the water as a clarifying agent. Okay, great. So all these things are contributing. High estrogen levels are characteristic of a pregnant woman, which prevents her from ovulating. So it's another way that it's lowering fertility, as well as, the F- in the water is bad for fertility. The aluminum is bad for fertility. And then we talked about the stuff in the food. The glyphosate on the soy, which is basically your standard protein in processed food. The atrazine on the corn, it's your standard high fructose corn syrup sweetener in the processed food. So all of these things are converging to make people more estrogenic, to make them infertile. And I also think a lot of children are confused about their gender because they're exposed to so many estrogenic chemicals that's contributing to this effect. And then the
gay frogs.
What?
The gay frogs?
Yeah, that's the Tyrone Hayes atrazine stuff. And so I think some of these kids, they get a little confused about their gender, and then the public schools will castrate them.
Yeah, I just watched a video on Gore-Tex, the stuff that's on like waterproofing, and that shit's all over the world. They test water on the top of mountaintops. They test water all over the place, and that shit's everywhere. So it really is just kind of mind-blowing how these chemicals and these they're like petrochemical pharmaceuticals and stuff.
What's your opinion on distilled water? I know some people are so against it because they say that it leaches minerals from your body, but I'm just curious on what your opinion is.
So if you talk about tap water, well, first of all, your blood has in the ballpark of an osmolality about 285 to 300. So let's just say that's the same as TDS. It's not exactly the same as TDS, but it's the same idea. The number of particles, let's say your thumbnail, per cubic centimeter squared, okay? Cubic centimeter, cubed. All right, so let's say you have in tap water in the ballpark of 500 particles. Okay, that's tap water. Then once you carbon filter it, you'll have in the ballpark, let's say, of 200 particles per cubic centimeter. Then when you do reverse osmosis, you'll have in the ballpark of about 10 to 110 particles, depending on how new the membrane is, how well it's working. When you distill it, you're going to drop the particle number down to about 0 to 2. Okay, and so the relevance is, if you drank a whole bunch of water like that, I would worry that you could become hypoosmolar. You've heard about that in the context of running marathons. People who drink too much water, they can get water intoxication, have seizures, and even die. So I would worry about having too much distilled water. But I do know there's some pretty famous people who claim distilled water is the best thing to drink.
Exactly, yeah.
There's Goldhamer with the True North Fasting Center up in Northern California. There was a guy by the name of John Yeomiyamis. It's hard to pronounce his name, but he wrote a pretty famous book on fluoride called The Aging Factor, and he was a biochemist, and he was a big recommender of distillers and distilling water. But I'm afraid of it because I'm afraid of hypoosmolarity. When I tried drinking just straight reverse osmosis water with a TDS around 10, I got a headache. So I didn't like that. So there's things you could do. You could take like a lemon or something else and squeeze it into the water to add a little bit of particulate material. You could eat first, whatever it might be for your meal, and then chase it down with water. I found that I get so much water from the plant foods that I eat that I don't need to drink any water. You know, if I have some beet juice, I'll chase it down with some water. So the bottom line is, it might be okay, but I wouldn't take the chance because I'm worried about it. I'm worried about hypoosmolarity and water intoxication, so that's why I don't go down that path. But I would if I squeezed something into it, I guess.
Also, people are like promoting alkaline water. Like, does it? I think, is it just marketing or?
You know, I don't know the answer to that for sure. There's something called Kagan water, which is really alkaline, and you'd ask yourself, might that be beneficial for cancer patients? Because an acidotic, you know, cancer thrives in a hypoxic acidotic milieu, tumor microenvironment. So, you know, fruits and vegetables are alkaline. So that's another reason why I think they're anti-cancer. Most of the good things you want to have happen, they happen from fruits and vegetables, and to a lesser extent starches. I would avoid the high protein beans, for example.
It's better because fruits have a structured water, so it's even better, right? I think.
Well, I do think they're quite alkaline, and look at all these people, survivors of metastatic cancer. That's one of the things that they're saying they believe really helped them to turn the corner. So if you have this alkaline water, might that be beneficial? It might be, but I would just have to check it out very carefully, because sometimes there's a hidden variable they don't tell you about. They achieved alkalinity by doing something else you might like, and I don't know exactly what they did. But theoretically, it might be beneficial. I don't know.
I have a question. There are these machines that are being sold. They make hydrogen water, and they have a little tube. So you drink the water that supposedly has hydrogen in it, and then there's a tube, and you breathe the hydrogen. What do you think about that?
I don't like the idea of breathing it. You never want to mess around with putting stuff up your nose, because you got olfactory nerves that go straight back to your brain, right next to the hippocampus. You know, the area of smell is thought to be the part of the brain, according to a guy named Gary Lynch at Irvine, that evolved into our cerebral cortex, because you can associate a smell with anything, versus tactile, precise locations are harder to free associate, so to speak. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is, inhale, for example, aluminum in deodorant, spray deodorants is thought to be a significant contributor to dementia as an aluminum neurotoxin.
Oh, wow.
So I don't like inhaling that. But now getting back to the hydrogen, what I think that's referring to is the concept of deuterium water, heavy water. And the relevance is that the inner mitochondrial membrane is a very precise, you know, nanometer scale machine, and it basically splits the atom. It splits a hydrogen into its proton and its electron. And then the protons are pumped into intermembranous space. The electrons are passed on the electron transport chain. The gradient of the protons concentrated in intermembranous space is harvested to let one of those protons come back through the ATP synthase. It spins and adds a phosphate to ADP to make ATP. Okay, so the reason I went through all that was, it is thought that when you've got the heavy water, the deuterium type water, that is messing up the ATP production in the mitochondria. so that if we had less of this heavy water, our mitochondria would function better. So I think what's happening is they're marketing deuterium-free water. They often call it DDW, deuterium-depleted water, and they claim that that's beneficial. And it might be. I don't know. I get the argument. I just have never bothered to follow it up, and I don't know how easy it is to obtain that stuff, and if it's worth doing, or if there's a side effect. I don't know.
So, like, the breathing of hydrogen isn't some sort of regenerative, life-changing miracle drug.
It makes
These
me nervous.
people are claiming that you don't have to go to the hospital anymore if you buy one of these machines and breathe this stuff.
Yeah, just like they say, you need fluoride in the water. They say you should put statins in the water. It sounds like marketing to me. And I just would be nervous, even though, let's say there might be one good thing in some new supplement or whatever it is, quite often it's packaged and there's a bunch of contaminants, and you're putting all that stuff in your nose, going to your olfactory nerve, going to your brain. I wouldn't do it.
And it's a Chinese machine that it's all going through too. So it's like, yikes, heat and plastic and whatever chemical that's going through there.
Yeah. It's just like the protein supplements made in China. Okay. The young men of this country then ingesting all the lead, cadmium, and other neurotoxins.
Yeah.
I have two different questions going on here. One is with those who have a vegan plant-based diet, would the alkalinity of the body be very, very different to those who consume animal products overall?
Well, it's going to be a little bit more alkaline. With the animal products, they're often preserved in sodium. The sodium chloride, the chloride is displaced by carbonate in the blood. That causes a low-grade metabolic acidosis. There's more methionine and cysteine, the sulfur-containing amino acids, and in part of their metabolism, some of them are converted to sulfuric acid. That causes a low-grade metabolic acidosis. So that's sort of the acidotic component of eating the high meat diet. And so, we're better off. We're designed to eat the plant food. You basically see everything goes in the direction you want when you eat low-fat plant foods. And everything tends to go in the direction you don't want when you eat all these meat foods. More cancer, atherosclerosis, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, all the chronic diseases.
So the second question would be if you had a standout patient who came to you in whatever level of ill health distress, and they became your role model of transformative, and they did what you said, what would that example be?
Well, like look at Kempner. Kempner had tons of patients like that. Everything improves. The key is that you'd like to get them to improve before they've had irreversible damage. Like if you become a low-fat vegan, and Roy Taylor showed with diabetes, every patient less than 4 years of diabetes, they all were cured. Okay, they lost 30 pounds or more. Every single one of them was cured. And Kempner had tons of patients like that as well. McDougall said he cured every single one of his type 2 diabetics. But, once you've had type 2 diabetes long enough that you've destroyed the beta cells of the pancreas, which make the insulin, then it's irreversible. And now you're insulin-dependent diabetic. You can improve your insulin sensitivity, but your diabetes is never going away. So you want to get to it before it becomes irreversible. Once you've lost your brain cells, those brain cells aren't coming back, but you can stop the ongoing loss of brain cells. And you'll have some that are kind of like stunned myocardium. They're dysfunctional, and you can get them to function again. So you can get some positive improvement in that way. But, it's sort of like stop the damage, do the good stuff, avoid the bad stuff.
That's really interesting because I've heard where people can reverse diabetes, but what you're saying is if they pass that point of no return, probably type 1 insulin, then actually the damage is done and you're into a maintenance situation then.
Yep.
Wow. You're just a wizard.
Thanks.
I want to.
Wizard.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, like, in your videos, you have some like comparison human body to carnivore body, right? Or like gut, and is it true that like in our mouth, our saliva, the enzymes are more like for plants and
it's a little more for plants. We got amylase to dissolve starch, sort of the big one. We got taste buds for starch. We've also got some glutamate taste buds for protein. It's not like we're only starch, but you look at your teeth. Our teeth are flat. My teeth are a little bit dark because I eat a lot of blueberries, and I should brush them more often. But Sometimes I just floss a lot of times at night, but I've been told I got to brush them more. Anyways, our teeth are flat like a horse, a herbivore. We don't got any big piercing teeth like a carnivore.
Yeah, makes sense. And I don't know if it's got to do something, but it's like when we sweat through the pores, the carnivore animals don't sweat through the skin. They like through the mouth, I think, or something.
The starch runner hypothesis.
Oh yeah.
It's where we have the ability to sweat and go long distances to collect lots of calories, basically.
Okay.
They like to say it's all about hunting, but really it could be all about collecting plants and fruit and stuff also. More gathering. Yeah, they try and point out, oh, we're able to chase the animal and bonk them on the head, but we're actually gonna, once things slow down, we're gonna watch it. We're actually going to watch a video about this. An endurance runner, a like hyper endurance runner with a bow and arrow, attempted to hunt down an elk, and he did not get one after 5 years. And this is a endurance athlete that's like far superior to the average person, and this guy could not bag himself an elk. So when they say that all these people were out hunting all day and catching animals, it's like, I don't know if they were doing that. And I know they just did that study where they've switched it.
Yeah.
They switched it from hunter-gatherer to gatherer-hunter because they're finding more evidence for plant-based foods in the past. And just, it's way easier to go collect some food on the ground or out of the trees than go risk your life to go fight an animal where you may end up with PTSD or something from it. It's just, this idea that the carnists have shoved down our throats that we just meat back in the day. It's not turning out to be really true logically.
And there's older video about some African tribe or like some people in Africa. I don't know, it's Maasai or some other. I think David Attenborough is in the background, and they're like chasing down the animals, but they're running long distance, right?
Yeah.
And then when she gets tired, then they kill her, like, or something like that. Like,
yeah, that's a theory. But obviously if a hyper endurance runner can't catch an animal, how are these guys, not saying that there couldn't be tribes, obviously in Africa, these dudes can run 400 miles off sweet potatoes, so it's like, but yeah,
it still, doesn't justify moral.
It may be too personal question, so you can say pass, but what has it been like trying to influence even those loved ones around you?
Most people, they just don't want to do it. They don't ever bother to learn the science behind it. And so some of it comes from example. Like I said, I'm 60 years old, 0 medical problems, totally healthy, and everything's good. My concentration, I can concentrate 14 hours in a row very easily. I do it all the time. So whereas the average patient, 60 years old, I joke, they're fat, sick, and stupid. They're cognitively slow. They've lost the ability to process nuance, and almost every single one of them. I don't even look at the chart. You tell me a patient's 60, I just assume that they're pre-diabetic or diabetic. They got a fatty liver. They're hypertensive, and they have coronary heart disease. There's no reason to look at the chart. That's a safe assumption in over 95% of them. So it's inevitable you're going to end up like that if you eat the sad diet. You're screwed, And if you eat the meat version of the Mediterranean, the same thing will happen, 5-10 years later, but you're still screwed. So why do that to yourself? Most people, though, they're not very motivated. It's just kind of sad. They don't get it. They just don't have the two connected because it's never been connected for them before in their life. And because of that, though, and they also sort of have this naive idea, well, I'm a good person, I'll just trust my luck, or they say things sometimes like, I'd rather die than stop eating meat. But yeah, very few people are interested and receptive to it. It's almost like they have to have something bad happen first. If they have a myocardial infarction or a stroke or something, then they might start paying attention. But for most people, they won't until something like that happens.
Or they say my grandfather lived 90 years, he smoked cigarettes, and like some.
Yeah, you know what I say to that one? You could have 100 blind people cross a busy street, and some of them make it, but it's not a good idea.
So, Peter, being like we're super high carb, usually we're riding bikes. This is the longest we've had a super busy summer, so we haven't been on the bikes as much. A question, Winter. One question: should we, in the off season, change our unlimited carb, high carb diet in any way if we're not as active? If it's like the off season.
Well, usually, you know, you're going to eat less because you're not burning as many calories. But if you're eating healthy food, your body has a set point. You know, your hypothalamus, hunger center, arcuate nucleus, it just tends to get you to eat whatever you need. So I don't ever count calories. And, you know, all these populations where all these people are healthy, you know, like back in the rice days of China, 1 billion out of 1 billion are skinny with no diabetes, hypertension, etc. They don't count their calories. They don't take any supplements.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like you know, Harley durian riders just like, oh, nonstop sugar, you know, like unlimited calories, nonstop. But yeah, he's riding, you know, he's working out a lot, quite a bit. And like when we're riding 4 days a week, you know, 50, 60 miles a day, it's no problem. But we're just, you know, now that we've had a couple months off, it's winter, you know, we just kind of we're like, I wonder if we should pull back on the sugar or anything like that at all.
I would expect your appetite's going to drift you back down to where you belong.
For
you
sure.
know? It doesn't happen right away, but it'll gradually happen, you know.
Yeah. But any of the actual like macros don't really need to change those that much.
I don't think so, because I think we tend to get plenty of nutrients. I also think Jeff Nelson had an interesting talk recently, just like in the last 2 weeks or so. Excuse me, we talked about the health of the Okinawans. They were deficient in multiple things according to the so-called, you know, like recommended daily allowance recommendations and blood levels. And they were like the longest lived people in the world at that time. So what I'm trying to say is they exaggerate how much you need of everything. And if you're eating good foods and you're eating what your hunger tells you to, you're probably going to be fine. That's what people have done since, you know, the beginning of recorded history. And I think that's kind of like what we're designed to do. Yeah, as long as you eat good foods, you're getting more nutrients than you need, and you tend to be just fine. Like there's no protein deficiency, there's no calcium deficiency, there's no fat deficiency. So
isn't it true though that like any glucose that comes into the body and is sent to the liver, I mean, we can change it almost into any single nutrient. I mean, I know there's the essential amino acids, but you know, glucose can be converted into, you know, at least 12 of the amino acids and to fatty acids through all of these biochemical processes. So that's why levels stay consistent, because we have this chemical factory called the liver that keeps everything in balance. Would you say that that's kind of a good thing? I think
that's pretty much true. The liver is great at doing its job. Just give it what it's made to get. You know, it's made to get plant foods, single whole food and that grow outdoors. You give it that and the liver's pretty happy.
And this is why you can put people on, you know, rice diets and they won't go into protein deficiency, even though they're getting barely any protein.
Yeah, that was the key thing, because human breast milk has 5 to 6% of calories from protein at the most rapid phase of growth in our lives. So if that's all you need at the most rapidly growing phase of your life, you're going to need a lot less than that at other times. And Kempner had them on very low protein. I forget the exact amount, something like 2.5%. And there's been other studies similar to that. And the people did really well. I know there's one study, all these starving people, they fed them 2.5% protein. They did great. So it's sort of like I think it's impossible. And McDougall said this, Pritikin said it, and my reading and study of it says the same thing. It's impossible to be too low in protein if you're eating a naturally chosen, you know, plant diet. Okay.
And you're getting enough calories.
Yeah. As long as you're not starving. You know, all those so-called kwashiorkor or protein deficiencies, they're starvation patients. They're not protein deficiency patients.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask. Oh, sorry. Just it was a quick one on what type of rice, because I'm hearing white. So is brown and wild and all of that?
Well, that's about the arsenic. Brown rice has more fat in it, so it doesn't store as long because the fat is more tends to go rancid. The white rice has less fat, stores longer. It also is less likely to have arsenic in it. in general too, the better rice that was thought was stuff like California rice, or at least not southeastern United States. What that came out of was it used to be cotton growing land, a textile product, so they were allowed to spray more pesticides on it. They had a problem with boll weevil pesticides, so they sprayed arsenic containing pesticides on there, and it gets in the soil. It takes decades to come out. So southeastern United States, not a good spot to buy your rice from. And then there was a new problem. The chickens had intestinal parasites, and they gave them arsenic-containing antibiotics into the chickens. Then the chicken feces were sold, including to the organic farmers. So they even got some arsenic into the organically farmed rice. But it's not that much. If you just rinse it once, your rice, or even twice is better. You should be okay. And I've eaten rice. I still eat rice about 3 or 4 times a week, and I've never heard of anybody having an arsenic toxicity from that. There was more arsenic in things like, in the apples and a few other things, apple juice and a few other things. But so I think that one's a little bit overblown. I know lots of people too. I have Asian friends that eat rice 3 times a day. They eat tons of it. And
I never eat rice 3 times a day.
Yeah, I've never heard one of them having a problem from it. So I think arsenic toxicity is less common, but I would still do what I can to avoid it. Like I said, I buy the organic rice from non-southeastern United States, like from California or something, and I rinse it once or twice. And
so white is fine. It doesn't matter what kind, just have rice. But
right. The reason for the white one was to avoid arsenic. There's more arsenic in the brown rice. When you polish it into white rice, you remove a lot of the arsenic, and then it's less likely to spoil, so you can keep it in a long time on the shelf.
And it's cheaper. It's like $1 a pound when you buy the 20-pound bags, and they last a long time. Like that's the whole myth about veganism being expensive. It's like, are you kidding me? We live off nothing.
If you're buying fake meat and specialty, probiotic vegan butters and all that stuff and yogurts, maybe. But yeah, you stick to the basics.
Or if you're in Canada.
True, yeah.
What about greens in the diet? Do you have any preference for like kale and spinach, or does it matter?
I'm kind of lazy. I'll just typically eat a salad every night. Sort of finish off the meal typically with a salad. That's all I do. Because I have to cook for myself now too. I got divorced. I don't know if you guys heard that. That's a whole other story. Okay, but so I'm real simple. I just boil starches, and then I have a salad at the end of my dinner. If somebody had cooked for me and there was cauliflower and kale and all this other stuff and broccoli, I would be happy to eat it, but I don't want to have to prepare it myself.
Yeah. I just know some people are very concerned about getting the greens in simply because of, there's the fiber aspect, but a lot of the dark green leafy vegetables have a higher content of certain vitamins and minerals. But, does it really matter when it comes down to it? When you think of Kepner putting people on white rice for so long.
Yeah, I can tell you, McDougall says you only need to get about 5% of your calories from veggies. And one of the reasons why you might want them is if you look at chlorophyll, for example, right in the center of chlorophyll is magnesium. So you get a little magnesium out of that. You also get more of your nitrates, which are the precursors to make a nitric oxide. The oral nitric oxide. So the nitrates come in as NO3. The back of your tongue bacteria make them the nitrites, NO2. They go to your stomach and they become nitric oxide from the gastric acid, absorbed in your blood, systemic vasodilation. Also from sunshine, you get release nitric oxide precursors, and so that also causes systemic vasodilation. I think that's why it feels good when you first walk out into the sun. So it's good to get that from your plants. So it's not that big of a deal. I think it's pretty easy to do. Some of the food companies claim that they don't put any of the bad stuff on there. AP, then EE, and then L is being put on some salads and stuff. So you want to try to get something that doesn't put that on there, so you can search around for that. But yeah, that's how I handle it.
And then your salad would be minimal ingredients then, because that's your kind of...
Yeah, I'd say salad dressing is for wimps. I mean, you don't need salad dressing. I typically buy, let's say, a 7-ounce thing. I pull the cover off, dump it into a bowl, and I rinse it off. I soak it in reverse osmosis water, then I eat it. I don't put anything on it. And I walk around while I'm eating it typically, and I enjoy doing that. That works. It's so simple and it works. And also when you keep things simple, you I don't know, it makes your life easier and you enjoy it. It's sort of like if I complicated it with salad dressings, you get all that slime on yourself, you know. Like I never cook with oil, so I don't ever have to use a dishwasher. There's a lot of, I think, benefits come from simplicity. You're faster, you avoid problems.
Practical. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's practical,
So
yeah.
it goes without saying then you don't eat nuts.
No, I wouldn't eat nuts because they're 80 to 90% fat. And they also tend to be very high in advanced glycation end products. They also are sort of moderately high in protein, like about 14, 15% of calories from protein. So it's sort of like what happens is the nut industry, billion-dollar industry, so they put lots of hype to market nuts. And McDougall had said before, most of this Seventh-day Adventist stuff coming out of Loma Linda University was all nut-funded, industry-funded. And because of that, they totally overhyped nuts. The other thing is, you know how there's sort of like a bro science circuit of health YouTube videos?
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yeah, if you want to get on the bro science channels, you got to bullshit. You got to say nuts and seeds, they're great, and soy is great. All this BS, and olive oil is great. BS, you know. And if you don't, you know, chant the party line, you don't get invited to those channels. So what I'm saying is, part of getting on that the party line is you got to say nuts are great. I think that's all BS. And again, Jeff Nelson over at VegSource has some good videos showing that nuts decrease blood flow. Anything that's going to have more advanced glycation products is not a good thing. That's going to cause some inflammation, and they're high fat. That's going to be bad for blood flow. So that's what I would say too. Yeah, what are nuts? Magic fat. It's the only fat that doesn't cause problems with blood flow, weight gain, diabetes. I
So
don't think so.
basically, if
That's
you eat
really-
too much nuts, you go nuts.
I mean, it's interesting because now it's all about nut milks, right? So that's like the de rigueur to do.
I think it all sounds like BS. I've had patients tell me they couldn't get like Chef AJ, for example. She couldn't get her weight under control until she quit all the nuts. I've had other patients tell me they couldn't get their blood pressure under control until they quit the nuts. But the nuts just get hyped. You know, what's so special about the nuts? Is it magic fat? How could you have 80, 90% of calories from fat and then be also moderately high in protein, high in advanced glycation end products? How could that be good for you?
Fair. What about avocados?
Oh, no way. Avocados, that's death food.
No.
Well, I'm sorry. I'll tell you why I say that. I say that because, you know, in nature, it might only be available for 2 weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
And you get it organically grown from some local tree. But now in the modern world, for some reason, they chose avocados as sort of like the ground zero food for that AP, then the letters E, and L. That's this new preservative that they spray on the outer surface of it. But I worry that it soaks in a little bit into the pulp of the food.
The appeal fresh stuff.
Yeah. And then I looked up the chem data sheets. It's toxic, man. It's more toxic than you could imagine.
Wow.
It had something in there like acetonitrile, which was something related to cyanide. It also was allowing heavy metals, hexane neurotoxins, and it also has trans fats in it. But the big one that got me was there was a cyanide-like chemical in there that's allowed on the chem data sheets. And I'm like, you know, the reason they say they have it is primarily it's listed as a fungal inhibitor, a mold inhibitor. So you have increased shelf life of the food, which, okay, fine, you do. But if I bought a food and I noticed that it did not spoil, I would not eat it. And for example, let's say bananas. If you have a banana and it's too rubbery, it's too resilient, I would throw it in the garbage can. That's an indicator, I think, that it probably has APEL on it from what I've studied. Yeah. And then apparently Costco, from what I've heard, it has a tendency to use that more than other places. And so I would never eat avocados. That's supposed to be the number one thing with it. And then in a lot of places, it's put on apples. So I stopped eating apples for other reasons, but that's one of the reasons why I don't eat apples. And you would want them to talk about it. I went and talked to these grocery guys that put out the produce, and usually they don't know anything. And then you go talk to the head person. And then the head person always says, you got to talk to the buyer. And you're like, well, when's the buyer going to be around? The buyer's only around, Tuesday afternoon for 2 hours. Okay, well, good luck finding the buyer. So the bottom line is they usually don't know. They don't always label it. So it's kind of scary. But what I've done, for example, if I buy a food that I think might have it on there, I'll just let it sit in a bowl on the countertop in the kitchen, and I wait to see when it spoils. Mm-hmm. And if it has abnormally delayed time to spoiling, I won't eat it.
I can concur with the apples, and it's in the land of maple syrup in Canada here, and it's organic. And those apples just it happened to be in the drawer. And I'm like, that thing's never going off. What is going on? And it's just, it's scary.
Yeah, in Serbia they spray it like 20 times here, like to ship it to Russia, and like I don't know, crazy.
You're paying for organic, which is getting conned. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good. So.
And what do they feed babies? Applesauce.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, you have to like. That's what I'm said again. Why I referred earlier to Christianity, Bible-based worldview versus atheistic Darwinism. In atheistic Darwinism, human life means nothing. A talking monkey of a peasant, they're of no value. I'm sorry, but that's what it means. It basically means human life is worth nothing. They're just a client who buys a product. They can go screw themselves. As long as we can hide responsibility and accountability, we will. Okay, because you think about it, why would anybody give like these psychiatric medicines or these other medicines to children or other people when they don't work? Like look at the Whitaker book on that sort of thing. And the reason, like, why do all these places lie about the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for dementia? And like my father was tricked into believing it. Most doctors are pretty conformist and believe whatever the big research centers say, because all they care about is profit. The patient's health is meaningless. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like, imagine somebody asked you and said, look, I'll give you, $10 to poison this person. You say, no, I wouldn't do it. They say, I'll give you $1,000. You say, no, I wouldn't do it. That's wrong. I won't do it. But the drug companies do it all day long, every day on a giant scale. And it's because of atheistic Darwinism. And the only thing that could fix that is a Bible-based worldview, which they never will want to accept because it'll go against their profits. And so the net line is to say, okay, it can't be fixed. Well, what can I do? You can educate yourself so you don't get chumped.
Can I throw the question of alcohol into this mix?
I was gonna get to that. No, perfect. That was the next question I was gonna ask.
Alcohol is a brain toxin. I recommend zero alcohol.
Right.
I actually think the whole alcohol lingo is stupid. Oh, let's get stoned. Let's get, we're stoned out of our minds. Well, great, you poisoned your brain cells. That's stupid. Why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
Did you? No, we just jumped from alcohol to cannabis, and so are you talking about that? Like, and again, look at in Canada here. It's
I think cannabis is a brain toxin. I recommend avoiding it 100%.
Perfect.
Yeah, there's all this stuff about CBD oil and all this stuff. I say no. One of the things I do, like I said, I'm a neuroradiologist. I talk to neurologists all the time. They say it'll cause psychotic breaks in some people. And then what happens is the person has a psychotic breakdown. Then they go to a psychiatrist. Then the psychiatrist treats them with antipsychotics. And those drugs will cause lobotomy. So you could end up with a lobotomy pretty darn fast. Don't mess around. Okay? Whoa. You have to protect yourself. The way you protect yourself is being simple. Low fat, low sodium, vegan, no oils. And avoid all drugs, all substance abuse. And that's your best chance.
Low sodium. Did we cover alcohol enough, Jeffrey, there? Or
yeah, I just wanted to see what he'd say about it.
And salt?
Well, I'll tell you one story. Like my kid came up to me when he was like in 7th or 8th grade or something. He said, Dad, the teacher screwed him over on a paper and it wasn't fair. And he did, I think, I think he deserved a better grade on his paper. But I told him a little story. I said, imagine there's a rabbit, hopping down the bunny trail. And the rabbit looks up in a tree and there's a hawk, okay? And the rabbit looks down the path in the other direction and there's a couple of coyotes. And then in the other direction, there's a bunch of snakes. And I said to him, what can the rabbit do? Do you think if the rabbit is really nice, the hawk, the snake, and the coyotes are going to be nice to him? No, they're going to kill him, okay? The only hope the rabbit has is to be smart, to be in tune with the forest, to be in the present moment, to build a system of burrow, to build a system of allies, to pay attention to the birds, the early warning alarm system, and learn how to survive in the forest. And that's what you have to do in life. And don't expect anybody to do you any favors. When you approach it objectively like that, then you can prevent problems and do pretty well. But if you're sitting around waiting for somebody to do a favor or create a new rule to protect you, I think you're going to be sorry. It ain't going to happen.
Well, that's a new age hut and Tulum, as we call it. Which is not the thing to do.
Yeah, because people expect, the hospital, the doctor, the regulatory agency. No, they don't give a rat's tail about you. Not at all. They don't even think you're a human. They think you are a talking monkey, and you need to shut your mouth and do as you're told. They care about you nothing. Zero. Yeah. You just have to get that. Once you realize no one cares about you, you also get some freedom in a sense. You're free to not agree with them. You're free to not take them seriously. You're free to try to avoid them.
Sure. So
Yeah,
do
last
you-
what was that video I watched last week? The man with no friends. Who was that? Someone. It was called The Man. It's just, sometimes when you don't have friends, you can, when you aren't worrying about what other people think about you or stuff like that.
Dangerous
Nietzsche, I think it was
level of
Nietzsche.
freedom.
Yeah, it was a Nietzsche video about just, getting rid of the societal norms and all that stuff and to find enlightenment.
Validation. A lot, like from toxic people or something.
Are you in ecology at all, Pete? Like old Jung or anything like that?
I'm sorry, what?
Or Steiner? You into Steiner at all?
I'm not familiar with Steiner.
Oh, Rudolf Steiner. He what was this? What's the schooling he did? The school Waldorf school.
He founded anthroposophy, and the world of schools and biodynamic agriculture. He's very much into the spiritual, spiritual science is what he calls it. It's just it's a spiritual discipline of anyway.
I sure wish I would have had you here when we had a 2-part debate on veganism in the Bible. It was pretty fun. Normally there's a couple other guys on the shows that are big Christian vegans, and we had a pretty fun. It was a couple months we were going hard on did you see a movie called Christspiracy that came out?
I heard about it. I tried to watch it, but I was not able to watch it. It just wouldn't let me through several attempts, and then I sort of gave up on that.
Very good movie. Very good movie. Definitely a good movie worth watching. And I think it's free to watch. We had a watch party, but I caught a copyright strike off that. But it's a very good movie. I would highly recommend seeing it. Very interesting.
On Christspiracy.com or something like that.
I believe so. Yeah, Christspiracy.com.
And you don't have to, I think, pay. It's like you just have to register, I think, right?
Yeah, I think it's free, but I know that they're dealing with a lot of people watching the video. I think more people than they were expecting. So their website might be down. Oh boy. Well, we're getting close to 2.5. Yeah, go ahead, Alicia.
It's a final closer for me. That knowing all that you know, and clearly if your brain size was as big as it appears, it wouldn't be on the screen here. Is there anything that you feel like you don't know yet, or is it really about trying to educate people in different ways now about what you do know?
Yeah, I mean, there's always things I don't know, and there's always I wish I had more time to study. But basically, my attitude is sort of I put it out there like a lighthouse, and people can take it or leave it. And I get bored of conventional medicine. Okay, I've done it for 30 years. I could do it, half my brain tied behind my back, so to speak. And so I feel better about this health, nutrition, toxicology stuff, even though I don't make any money from it. I know it's good. I know it's right. And I get a lot of compliments from my friends. I get friends who tell me really nice things about what I'm doing. So I know I'm right. And so I just sort of accept, you sort of accept your fate, the Nietzsche thing, amor fati. I know I'm half screwed, but I'm also half lucky, and I just do the best I can. And I sort of leave it at that. And I wish, I'll do my little part the best I can. It's sort of all you could do. And then I think it also comes down to like the Schopenhauer quote. How does a man find happiness? Okay. And I think a man finds happiness when he does what he feels he should do. James Watson had said a horse is happy when it runs because it's made to run. Okay. And sort of, I have a knack for this stuff and I'm interested and I like it. So I'm happy when I teach about it. And so that works. Like my kid said to me, he goes, "Dad, why are you so happy? You're the happiest person in the family, but out of everybody in the family, you have the worst life. Your life sucks. All you do is work in the hospital all day. Then you come home, you make your YouTube videos. On the weekends, you write your book chapters. You don't do anything. Your life sucks. I would hate to have a life like you." And I said, I was sort of born to do this. And I enjoy teaching and writing, and it makes me happy to do it. So I do it. And that's sort of, I feel like I fulfilled my destiny. And when you do fulfill your destiny, you respect yourself. So you're happy. So I guess that's why I'm happy.
And you have a clear conscience. Yeah.
You're making a difference.
Oh, well, thanks.
Like one brain at a time, one tweak at a time. And then we tell 2 friends and so on and so on. What was that advert? What was that brand that was a long time ago?
The Doublemint gum or something. I don't know. Or shampoo. I don't know. Something like that.
How did you find veganism, Peter?
Well, I got fat in my 30s. I was working too much. And my mother had cancer and she was getting worse. And my father had coronary artery disease. And so I was sort of like, thought I was a big shot doctor. I was first in my class. I got perfect board scores in med school and residency. I'm doing a fellowship at Harvard. And I sort of said to myself, if I'm such a great doctor, why am I fat? Why does my father have, coronary artery disease or recommending him for open heart surgery? Why does my mother have cancer and she's getting worse instead of better? I had previously always assumed that every specialty knows what it's doing and there's nothing I could do to ever study the other field. And how could I ever possibly know what they know about their specialty? Okay. And then I always, I've been brought up on Maciota the pill and send the bill. And if that doesn't work, do a surgery. And I was an imaging guided surgeon at that time. And so then I went and asked my friends, I go, gee, I'm fat, my cholesterol's high, what should I do? And they recommended a statin and some other pills. And I'm like, well, gee, I don't know if I really want to do that. So then I started to read and I went through all the diet books. I said, this has to be my number one priority in my life. And I started coming across, South Beach diet, Atkins diet, all this stuff. And then I eventually, found the plant-based diets, the Mediterranean diet, then McDougall. And the more I learned about it, I'm like, wow, this is where all the answers are. They're curing people of diabetes. They're curing people of obesity. They've got populations with no diabetes, no hypertension, no coronary artery disease. And the more I kept looking into it, the better it got. And then I saw that it was solving problems in toxicology. And I'm like, wow, this is great. How come nobody's talking about it? It took me a while before I started to learn. At first I thought, I'm going to get rich. I understand all these things now. I can help so many people. And the patients don't want it. Conventional medicine doesn't want it. Nobody wants it. And the more I learned and the better I got, I get compliments from individual doctors who come visit me and ask me advice for themselves and their families, but they would never invite me to speak in front of their groups, because their business is selling drugs. So I started to also realize, gee, the more you go down this path, the more you're going to pay a price too. The more you're going to be ostracized from conventional medicine. But you can't help going down that path if you want to help people. So you end up in that dilemma and you just have to accept it or quit. But I don't want to quit, so I just accept it.
Awesome.
Don't quit.
Yeah, don't quit.
Yeah, I know it's good. I know it's right. So
no, your videos are some of the best videos I've seen,
I agree.
on this subject for sure.
And they're very necessary right now just because of the
All the
culture,
bullshit.
both with the
All the
carnism
science.
and with the veganism culture too. It's a very important, needed
Stage of
contribution.
fight now. Like,
yeah,
it's a
I'll
real-
address that. Thanks, because I also had the experience too, because I'm looking at these vegans and a lot of these other nutritionists and a lot of the famous ones too, and I'm like, they're trying to recruit patients to their clinics a lot of times, so they won't tell the audience what the audience needs to know. Other times, they're very often selling something. They're selling omega-3s, or they're promoting olive oil for some company or something. So I'm like, they're BSing the public. I said, I'm not going to do that. And I always had liked biochemistry, molecular biology, and all these subjects. So I said, gee, now I'm going to be a little bit arrogant and cocky, but I said to myself, I'll never be allowed to be popular, but I could be the best in the world. I'm going to go for that. And I don't give a rat's ass. I'll never make a dime with it. They're always going to ostracize me and block me. But I tell you guys a funny story, right? So my wife divorced me. That's a whole stupid thing. I thought it was illegal. I couldn't believe she divorced me, my wife, all right? I'm not going to get into that, but I'm going to tell you a little something funny. I got told by some friends to call this girl. They thought would be a good girl for me, right? This lady. So I'm talking to her, how you doing? And she's super skeptical of me. She's talking to me like I'm some jerk, and she's not even sure she wants to talk to me. And she's like, man, oh, well, so-and-so said you're nice. So I said, okay. I said, okay, well, go to Amazon and see my books. Because she wasn't even believing that I was a doctor. I said, go to Amazon and see my books. She goes, okay, that's a lot of books. I go, okay, go to my YouTube channel. That's a lot of videos. But are they any good? I go, why don't you watch them? I'll talk to you tomorrow. So I talked to her tomorrow. She's like, would you like to go for some coffee? So I'm kind of joking. I don't make any money from it, but it impressed her. So it was worth something. So YouTube finally paid off. So, that's kind of where I'm coming from. I know it's right. I don't got anything else better to do, so I do it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Better than sitting and watching TV, right?
What?
It's good karma.
It's a better way to spend your time than, like most people where they're sitting in front of a television or, watching movies and just mind numbing themselves. You're doing something you're passionate about and you're educating, the world. You're educating the people that are interested, the people that, have an affinity toward this information.
Oh, right. Yeah. My daughter said something to me along those lines too. She said, Dad, I like what you're doing. She says, you really want to understand things. You really tell people the truth. You try to teach them. You go into detail. And the other thing too is I'm trying to convince the experts, a lot of times a lot of these plant sites, they're just trying to sell something to people, and they don't really care about the truth or convince them anything. All they want to convince them is, you have a deficiency and I've got the answer, buy my product, okay, or come to my clinic. Versus I want to really understand these things, and I want to convince the other doctors. And I have a little bit of chip on my shoulder. I'm a little pissed off that I'm kind of ostracized from conventional medicine, and then I call them the high-fat phonies have ostracized me. You know, like Plant Chopper says, oh, you know, Rogers is too divisive. We can't ever interview him. You know, a lot of times,
that's ridiculous.
Plant Chopper refuses to ever invite me. He says, I'm too divisive to the vegan community. Chef AJ's bullshitting. You heard how she fired me because I made a joke about Kempner. You know that story?
Yeah.
She didn't care about the Kempner joke. She already saw that video and thought it was funny. But then later on, when people got pissed off because I pointed out that the high-fat phonies are not the same as the low-fat vegans like McDougall, myself, and Nelson, and Pritikin, and Kempner, then she's like, oh, no, we can't have that on our show. And I got fired. Okay, so it's like, you know, excuse me, you tell the truth. You know, Plato said no one is more hated than he who tells the truth. So I'm like, okay, well, fine. You know, I don't really give a rat's ass. I'm not doing this for money. You can do what you want. I'm going to keep telling the truth, you know. So that's.
And your artwork is legendary. I love it.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Yeah, it's basically the same problem like for the freedom movement, right? So
yeah.
Like, same. Like
in the spirituality world and the freedom movement, we have a mentor that we all follow, and this guy 5 years ago was, you know, getting 100,000 views on every video, was the biggest guy in our movement, and the second he said he went vegan,
he's
like
died.
one of the most hated now because he told everyone that they gotta start looking on the inside and taking care of their karmic inventory and their, you know, all the more morality stuff, and they just don't want to hear him anymore.
Yeah, they also hate you for Christianity. They don't like you for Christianity, but the reason I continue to talk about it is because unless you have a Bible-based worldview, it's all screwed. As long as the patient is nothing but a talking monkey, they're always going to screw over the patient, and the patient is currently a talking monkey in terms of the moral value system through high school, college, and through med school. And also, if you look carefully at the biology, I was an A+ student in evolutionary biology at Stanford. You cannot explain the origin of life, the origin of complexity, you know, the eye, the brain, the clotting system, the immune system. You can't explain any of it. You know, like you've heard my metaphor about you're seeing your name on the beach. You know that one?
No.
Imagine you go to the beach and you see your name written in the sand. You would say an intelligent person who's literate wrote my name. The water's not going to write your name. Okay, so whatever your name is, 5, 10 letters, if that can't happen without an intelligent, active individual doing it, how are you going to write the genome? The genome is 3.3 billion, B as in billion base pairs of complex chemistry. Where did the information come from to write that? You can't get that from a lightning bolt going into a mud puddle, okay? It's just not going to happen to write 3.3 billion perfect base pairs of complex chiral biochemistry. So, you know, all of my study makes me believe in God. And I also say, until you go down that path and you value the individual, it's always going to be all about the money, and all this other talk is just a big fake, and the patient's always going to get screwed, and it's never going to change.
Yeah, we call it Satanism around here. Yeah, moral relativism is a big problem.
Self-preservation.
Nobody cares.
I just remember learning the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, learning all of what cellular respiration is, and thinking to myself, this is God. There has to be a God because of this. This is where life comes from. This is where energy comes from, and energy fuels everything. And so it's just beautiful to see that tied in with, you know, the truth of teaching people of how, you know, by simplifying how getting more blood flow to these little organelles in all of our cells,
you can think,
healing ourselves. It just all comes together. And, you know, the truth is very simple. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, there's like an elegant beauty to it. And you're like, wow, this is good. This is true, you know, and it's sort of like, and then it's even, you know, more fascinating when it wants to go into biosynthesis. It can reverse the direction of Krebs cycle, and it's just beautiful. And so that's kind of like how I believe you should even teach the biochemistry, you know. And then there's sort of that Bishop Barron. I don't always agree with him on a lot of things, but he says it's good for people to see beautiful art, because when the more they look at the beautiful art, the more they start to say to themselves, well, gee, this is good. And the more they realize it's good, the more they realize there's truth in it as well. And I think something similar comes from looking at biochemistry and, you know, science in that way. You know, you say this is not only good, this is beautiful. It's like I was just talking about the electron transport chain. It splits the atom. I mean, how magnificent is that? And then it uses that to generate electrical power. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Crazy.
Our first element providing so much energy, just an electron and a proton. Whew. Anyway, it's just beautiful.
It's so amazing how lucky we all are to be in this moment. And yeah, I'm a later adoptee, obviously. But if you think about the percentage of population that are vegans, and then the percentage of vegans that follow this low fat,
it's why we have 5,000 viewers between, or 5,000 followers between the five of us, basically.
If this could be bottled and shared in terms of what the feeling is and the
sharing
results
is caring.
are and the health and the you know our existence from a biblical perspective.
It's not popular right now, but
and it's not always about like not just knowing, like Peter, he knows and he acts upon it, right? Like we talked about this last week with a teenager. And he didn't.
What are the three expressions of consciousness?
Oh,
yeah.
Breach of contract.
Yeah.
Inside. This is an inside situation.
Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, no, as you think, so you feel, and so you act. That's like what we're talking about, unified.
Because if you don't act, you don't quite care. So it's those one other.
The Holy Trinity.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for coming, Peter.
My pleasure.
So much
Thanks.
fun.
I had fun.
Do you want to shout out your channel?
Oh yeah, if anybody's curious to see my videos, it's at Peter Rogers MD is my YouTube channel. At Amazon.com is where all my books are. So yeah, you're more than welcome. I got a lot of videos.
Definitely have a lot of videos, and they're binge watchable too.
Yes, check them out. You can just have them on play and just go through.
We've been watching at least one of your videos a show for a while now. It's been really awesome.
They're captivating for a pretty broad audience, which is cool. Regardless if they agree or not, it's at least planting this.
And you're a pretty interesting dude, so it makes it a lot easier. The funny and all that,
including the sketches. Yes.
Yeah, the fact that you love fine art so much, but your drawings.
Such a contrast.
Yeah.
A beautiful contrast.
Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah, well, thanks. My pleasure.
Yeah.
We'll go forth and conquer with this information. Thank you.
We'll have you back sometime too, for sure.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. I'd be happy to.
Awesome. See ya.
See ya.
Thanks.
Cheers to the people who did wake up and activate and become peers in the great work. Nothing but admiration and thanks. And this forced shadow work has not been for you. It has been for those who did not respond to the fucking call of freedom. And you guys already know that. I don't even need to repeat that. But I will say with my Vienna lager here, cheers to the people who really did the great work. The ones who really activated, the ones who spoke out, the ones who put the message of freedom publicly out into the world through the creation, the creative expression that came from within themselves to publish and communicate it to those in need of that knowledge. You're my brothers and sisters, and you're my peers in the great work, and thank you.